He had a bizarre gift. He fancied himself a professional chef, worthy of culinary critics, when, in truth, he was just a chubby guy with a love for anything edible. From a young age, food was his passion and, to be honest, his obsession. The boy was so addicted that even those questionable delicacies no one else would touch, he devoured with gusto, as if they were divine feasts. But, let's be real, his childhood was far from a bed of roses. His parents fought more than cats and dogs, and his father practically vanished from his life. It was as if the father figure had been sucked into a vacuum cleaner. And then, to top it all off, came the bombshell. One day, his mother looked at him and said, with unsettling ease, that one day she'd leave for somewhere so far away that neither he nor his father would ever find her. That sentence etched itself in the boy's mind like a poorly done tattoo. Every morning, he woke up in panic and rushed to check if his mother was still in bed. Finding her sprawled out, snoring without a care in the world, he'd let out a sigh of relief so profound it could almost be heard from afar. It was a small daily triumph. His mother was still there, and he didn't have to face the world alone, knowing her hand wouldn't abandon him. Because of that, he tried his best to show his mother he was the dream son, the one who'd make her heart swell with pride. But, oh, poor mom. Her always sad gaze seemed to carry more weight than a truck full of bricks. Sometimes, she'd even ask the boy if he wanted to keep living with her. And if the answer was yes, the rule was clear: total obedience. Yet, without warning, she made her great exit like magic, leaving him so alone that even the house ghosts took off. And she had the audacity to leave a note, as if a piece of paper could replace a proper goodbye. If I were the kid, I'd be mad too, you know? When he read that note, the boy's heart plummeted faster than a rotten apple. He screamed desperately for his mother as tears flowed like a river during a flood. Waking up from that nightmare felt like emerging from a horror movie, but instead of a hero, he found himself an independent adult still bearing the scars of childhood. Staring at the ceiling, he muttered that it had been a while since the terrible dream had visited him. The question lingered: why on earth did this horror film still play in his head? And the pain, oh, the pain, it was like a shadow that refused to leave him in peace. As he tried to compose himself after the emotional storm, someone burst into his house, shouting his name. It was his dear friend, Soyun. Seeing him there, she didn't miss a beat. "Do you want to die or what, honey? And what are you chewing on, a feast?" He, completely bewildered and looking like he had just swallowed an entire duck, asked why she was there so early. Her response was a classic: "I almost called the Animal Protection Society because a massive pig escaped from the farm and was devouring powdered milk in my house." Offended, but trying to play it cool, he asked if she couldn't just chalk it up to part of his trauma. But the girl, with the expression of someone who had just discovered a new ice cream flavor, shot back, "You dreamed you were drinking milk from your mom like a little baby, didn't you?" With a mix of shame and sadness, he admitted it, saying that, as strange as it was, it had become a habit that eased some of the longing and pain from his mother's disappearance. Soyun was his only confidant, always ready to offer support, even in the most embarrassing moments. Trying to lighten the mood, Soyun invited him for a feast. Today there was spaghetti at the cafeteria. His heart raced, and all he could think about was pasta. "Why are you only telling me this now?" he exclaimed, nearly jumping for joy. After all, they had met in elementary school and were now studying together in Baekgang's culinary program. On the way, as they talked about the spaghetti, he grew more excited. "The taste is amazing. That's why going to university is so incredible." Suddenly, he turned to Sian and asked, in a teasing tone, how long she planned to follow him. "Next thing, you'll be joining the army with me." Offended, she snapped back, "Who's following who here? You're the little piglet that won't leave my side." In a moment of pure comedy, he retorted that she had crossed the line, now calling him a piglet. "A more respectful term, please." To lighten the mood, she squeezed his chub and declared that she would now call him Susan, King General of Pigs. Outraged, he pushed her hand away and asked where she thought she was touching. "Just because I'm fat, you think you can do that?" Laughing, she tried to sound serious. "Look, if you keep stuffing yourself with powdered milk, you're going to turn into a real piglet." Trying to help her friend, she posed a question: "Don't you think you could swap it for something else? You might end up diabetic." He pondered for a moment and, with the wisdom of someone who had just woken up, replied, "I don't know, but someone told me I'd get thinner if I joined the army." And so, between laughter and conversations, life went on, weaving past and present, pain and friendship, like a perfectly al dente spaghetti, a dish that always brought hope. Completely caught off guard, he suddenly heard someone shouting his name in the middle of the park. It was a stunning girl saying hi, and, my friend, at that moment, he lit up more than a kid in a candy store. It was none other than Kingi. The protagonist was so embarrassed he looked like a ripe tomato about to burst. The situation was so awkward that even the birds stopped to watch the spectacle. After that unsettling moment, Kingi left, and, let me tell you, she was so beautiful that even the trees seemed to line up to admire her. Kingi was a first-year student in Bayat Gang's business administration department, and ever since she joined the university, she had become the idol of the men. And of course, our protagonist had a crush on her, or rather, a huge crush. From the first day of class, he saw her and fell in love on the spot. For Kingi, however, Sohu is just another one of her fanatical followers, drooling every time she walked by. She had a whole legion of admirers, each one more desperate than the last. Sohu, meanwhile, was there trying to get his friend's attention since he was always buying things for Kingi while neglecting his best friend. And, as if that weren't enough, he got a flying kick to the back for staring at her. Nothing like a little violence to spice up a friendship, right? After a few minutes, he finally arrived at the kitchen, ready to start class under the supervision of Professor Hira, the star chef of the food and culinary department at Bayek Gang University. Hira was a woman who could turn any dish into a work of art, and she certainly didn't have time for amateurs. As she walked through the kitchen, something caught her attention. It was the dish prepared by our dear protagonist. She was so impressed it was as if she had discovered a new galaxy. "This was to be expected from you," she exclaimed, praising not only the taste but also the presentation of the dish, something she claimed she had never seen before in her life. The small yet talented protagonist was more embarrassed than a cat caught during a bath. All he could do was thank her politely, awkward and flustered. His friend, watching the scene, noticed that Sohu's face was still reflecting his pain from the dream about his mother. But thanks to the praise from the professor he admired most, the young man seemed to gain a new sense of energy, as if he had just downed a giant energy drink. The professor, with a curious look, asked if his rival, Minji, had shown up to class yet. Sohu replied that he hadn't seen even a shadow of Minji around. Ah, Minji, the childhood friend and only son of the star chef Taezong. Imagine competing with that. It was like trying to slay a dragon with a plastic sword. Sohu felt furious at him, grumbling that the guy was a total jerk. But honestly, who wouldn't be at least a little annoyed in such a fierce rivalry? After all, how could Sohu, our incurable romantic, ever win over the girl who happened to be his best friend's crush? It was like trying to fit an elephant into a shoebox, completely impossible. But his loyal friend Seyun, always wearing that "I'm the voice of reason" expression, tried to comfort him. She offered him the classic advice, "It's been over 2 months, buddy. It's time for you to move on and forget about this." She even added that part of the blame was his own for showering Kingi with gifts while she was with Minji, as if that would somehow earn him a discount in their relationship. But Sohu, with the expression of someone who had just been hit by a meteor, simply nodded in silence. "It doesn't make sense for me to stop liking Kingi," he sighs, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I liked her long before Minji showed up." The truth is, up until then, the boy didn't even know Kingi existed until he himself introduced her to his best friend. A true emotional trap. When Sohu found out that Kingi was dating, it was like taking a direct punch to the face, and not just any punch, but one of those that makes you see stars. And, of course, the sneaky Minji started looking at Sohu as if he were an insect on a sunny day, crushing whatever remnants of self-esteem the poor boy still had. Meanwhile, Sayun, with a heart full of compassion and a cup full of courage, suggested that the protagonist find a girlfriend to help him overcome the trauma caused by his mother. Ah, the wisdom of a friend. With a trembling voice, Sohu began to open up about the ghosts his mother had left in his mind, as if each memory were a soap bubble about to pop. She always said she'd go to an island where no one could ever find her. Because of that, the poor boy now had a fear of anything resembling a beach. What if she really vanished from the face of the earth, he wondered, staring into the void. Soyun, listening to all this, remained silent, her expression filled with pity, enough to melt even the hardest heart. After all, no one should have to live through an emotional horror film like that. After a long night of venting and a few too many drinks, Seon decided it was time to leave. As she approached Sohu, she noticed he had already fallen into a deep sleep, like a happy and carefree piglet. "Pig! Get up and take a bath before bed," she joked. But as she looked closer, she noticed he had a strange expression, half smiling, but with tears streaming down his face. Worried, she asked, "What's going on with you, Sohu? Are you dreaming about food or your mother?" To her sadness, the boy's sobbing grew louder as he began calling out for his mother, begging her not to leave him alone. And so, amid laughter and tears, Sohu's life went on, caught between unrequited loves and haunting memories. She remembered the powdered milk and wondered if, in that crazy dream, his mother had been nursing him while weighing on his mind with her words about leaving. Seeing the ongoing suffering of her best friend, the girl couldn't hold back her tears as she witnessed such a heartbreaking scene. Deep in thought, she began to wonder if perhaps letting Sohu recreate that scene with her might help him overcome his trauma and finally be happy. But, overwhelmed with embarrassment, she abandoned the idea and kept reflecting on what she had just considered. What on earth was going through her mind to think of something like that? After all, it didn't matter if she was drunk or not. The next morning, there they were again in their cooking class, this time with the Chinese cuisine professor, Ban, and Minji, who quietly kept his eyes on the two of them. Soyun cracked a joke with Sohu, who burst out laughing, completely amused by his friend's humor. The truth was that Minji had always had a crush on Seon since childhood, though she had no clue how he felt seeing her give so much attention to that little piggy Sohu. After class, the big moment finally arrived. Professor Bang built suspense for the entire room before announcing the best dish of the day. And, to absolutely no one's surprise, he declared that the best dish belonged to Sohu, but also to Minji. The professor, visibly contemplative, explained that he truly couldn't decide which was better, so both were awarded first place. Offering support, Seon told her friend that it was fine and that, in the end, he had come out on top. Feeling bashful, Sohu tried to play it off, saying it was no big deal and asking them to stop because he was getting too embarrassed. But Minji, far from pleased, was visibly irritated at feeling like a second-place finisher. He glared at Sohu, grumbling that he couldn't believe they'd tied for first again and were now being treated as equals. When he saw his beloved standing next to Sohu, tasting his food, Minji completely lost his composure and began silently fuming. "Why is she eating that fatty's garbage instead of trying the luxury dish I made?" he thought angrily. After class, they started heading home, chatting about the previous night and asking each other all sorts of questions along the way. In the middle of the conversation, Seon decided to ask if, after falling asleep, he felt anything touching his lips. "I thought you were dreaming about being nursed by your mom," she said, recalling how he was crying and shouting her name. When Sohu heard this, he turned completely red, asking if it was true, while his friend took the opportunity to tease him a bit, leaving both him and the girls around them surprised. The protagonist said he understood, but then confessed that Seon had also appeared in his dreams. Hearing that was like a punch to the gut for the girl, who immediately shot back, "Stop joking about things like that. It's not funny at all." But he insisted he wasn't joking and that both she and his mother had appeared in his dreams the previous night. Feeling nervous but also curious, Seon decided to ask Sohu what she was doing in his dream. Now it was his turn to get flustered. "I don't even know how to explain it, but when you hear it, you're going to," he hesitated, and Seon, with a mix of embarrassment and disgust, urged him to spit it out. "What could possibly disgust me?" "It was just a dream," she scoffed. Shocked, he asked if she was serious. "If it was just a dream, like you said, then there's no reason to get mad at me." After her confirmation, Sohu blushed even harder and confessed that, besides his mother, Seon had also tried to nurse him in the dream. When Seon heard that, her world crumbled. She froze in shock, trying to figure out how to escape the situation. Trying to brush it off, she kicked the protagonist on the butt and asked if he'd lost his mind to imagine and joke about something like that. Irritated, she yelled at him, saying there were some dreams he should never have, let alone mention out loud in his right mind. The poor guy, now in pain, asked why she was so mad since she had said she wouldn't be upset because it was just a dream. She snapped back, saying that, even so, it wasn't something she could forgive, warning him that if he dared to dream about something like that again, she'd end him. A little sad, she started wondering if, somehow, it had actually happened or if it was just one of those bizarre coincidences. Still tormented, the boy asks what he should do if she shows up without any clothes in his dreams again. Embarrassed, the girl doesn't even know where to hide her face and asks if he's completely lost his mind. And of course, it didn't take long for that jerk Minji to show up, asking the protagonist if his house wasn't nearby. Minji couldn't resist taking a jab, pointing out that the protagonist seemed to have gained a few extra pounds. He joked that he could give the boy a ride home but then laughed and said he'd be a good friend and let him walk to get some exercise just for his health. Minji's girlfriend, shocked, asked what the heck was wrong with him and suggested that he should also give Sohu a ride. While Minji told her to get in the car, the protagonist reflected that the only reason he didn't punch that smug face was because Minji's girlfriend was there. The kind-hearted girlfriend replied that she was fine and would also head to Shin Sohu's house for some drinks. Seeing Minji's disgusted expression, the protagonist worried she might feel ashamed of hanging out with him. Minji, annoyed, sped off in the car, sarcastically saying that if that's how it was, then fine. The protagonist wondered what kind of wild trip this was and why they were rushing so much. He grumbled to Siyun that the rude guy hadn't even let him say goodbye to his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Kengi watched everything unfold and thought to herself that Minji never does anything for Sohu, but whenever Siyun is around, he acts like a jerk. She couldn't help but wonder why he cared so much about Siyun when he already had a girlfriend. As soon as Minji got home, he remembered the day he confessed his feelings to Siyun. Poor Siyun had responded that she was sorry but would rather pretend she hadn't hurt him. Minji couldn't understand why and tried to get her to talk, saying it wasn't fair to toy with someone else's feelings. In a dramatic tone, he told her he didn't want to be just her friend, he wanted something more. Siyun, with all the politeness in the world, replied that if they stopped things right there, they could still be friends, but if he pushed further, he might lose his best friend. As she turned to leave, he shouted, "If I'm your best friend, why are you always with Shin Sohu?" He continued, saying it had been a long time since they'd gone out together and that they always excluded him, clearly losing his temper. He ended by declaring that she might as well be that fat guy's bodyguard, but he couldn't understand why she couldn't do the same for him. Soyun responds that they are great friends and that Minji does just fine on his own, even without her around all the time. But Sohu doesn't have his mother. She takes care of him as a good friend because he needs her far more than Minji does. She adds that if he keeps up this ridiculous jealousy, they won't be able to remain friends because it's starting to bother her. Meanwhile, Kengi notices her boyfriend's feelings for Siyun, which wounds her pride. As all of this unfolds, the only thing running through Kengi's mind is the day she met Ninji's father. During their introduction, his father even told her that if she dedicated herself to her studies, she could own a restaurant in the future. Worried, Minji stepped in and asked his father what kind of future father-in-law pressures someone like that. The old man, embarrassing the girl, said that if she managed some of his restaurants one day, it wouldn't be such a bad thing. At that moment, she saw a chance to become part of Minji's family and oversee Tae-Zun's restaurants. While things weren't looking great for Minji, the kind-hearted girl was heading home after having a few drinks with the protagonist. As soon as she arrived, her mother immediately barked, "Why on earth did it take you so long to get home? You're already late for dinner." Then her father, all smiles, rushed over and asked why her cheeks were as red as a pepper. Quick on her feet, she replied that she had a few drinks with a friend. Her mother, not missing a beat, smacked her and asked what she was thinking. "No denying it, you're just like your father, always loving a drink," she added. The good friend tried to explain, saying that Sohu had been feeling down lately, and she was just listening to his stories while they had a few drinks. But her mother, laughing at her, said they should just get married already and stop pretending. Mortified, the girl asked her mother why she would say such a thing and how she could possibly marry that little piggy. Her mother shot back, saying that no one knows her better than that boy and, as adults who are always together, it's only a matter of time. Furious, the girl insisted that they were just friends and that even if they bathed together, nothing would happen. At that moment, her mother started smacking her again, declaring that nothing coming out of her mouth made any sense. The father, trying to help, says that Sohu is a good and trustworthy boy. The daughter, incredulous, asks what's gotten into him, reminding him for the millionth time that they're just friends. But the father responds by asking how a man and a woman can be friends without any hidden intentions. The parents insist that when they were young, they were just friends too. One never knows what might happen. Frustrated, the girl snaps that their opinions are so ridiculous she doesn't even know how to respond. Stepping away from the uncomfortable conversation, she states that she's tired and needs to rest because she has to wake up early. Meanwhile, back at his house, the protagonist drowns his sorrows in powdered milk, wondering why he misses his mother so much after she abandoned him and his father. Lying in bed, Seon reflects that her reason for staying by Shin So-woo's side goes beyond mere friendship. There has always been a special reason. She recalls a memory from when she was a little girl. One day, as she left her apartment, she came face to face with So-woo's mother, who had several suitcases. Being polite, she asked where the woman was going, but she didn't get a response. Instead, the woman asked where her friends were. Seon explained that they had gone to the computer lab and she had come first to wait for them. Persistent, the little girl asked again what the woman was doing with the suitcases. With cold detachment, So-woo's mother replied that she was going on a trip to get some fresh air but might return to play later. When So-woo received the letter, he began crying desperately, and Seon was there by his side, supporting him. At just 11 years old, the little girl became the sole witness to the mother's departure. Amid the chaos, the little boy asked Seon if she had seen his mother. Embarrassed, she had to lie, saying she hadn't seen anything and that the door was already closed when she arrived. At that moment, Seon promised herself it would be the first and last time she lied to her friend and vowed to always take care of him. Meanwhile, at Minji's house, the jealous jerk was in the shower, stewing in anger as he thought about his beloved spending time with So-woo. Consumed with rage and heartache, he pulled his girlfriend closer to him. The next day, during lunch, Kengi noticed something strange about So-woo. Out of nowhere, she pulled his mouth downward and asked what was going on. Confused, he asked if he'd been sucking on his lips again, and she confirmed it. While they were studying, a stunningly beautiful girl appeared, catching both of their attention. The protagonist's eyes lit up, and he became flustered, unsure of how to react. She leaned in flirtatiously, calling his name and saying she urgently needed to talk. So-woo was left speechless. After all, this was the girl he liked the most. So-yoon, seeing her friend acting like a lovesick fool, grew annoyed and mentally begged him to shut up. Yoo-soo, noticing the scene, asked how he was doing and what he was up to. The chubby boy, clueless about what to say, could only stammer, asking if she was okay and if she'd come to study with them. But to his surprise, Yoo-soo asked if he had time to have lunch with her, playing coy and sweet. She explained that her boyfriend wasn't around and she didn't want to eat alone, saying she'd love So-woo's company. The boy was in shock, completely dazed, and quickly agreed, suggesting a fancy restaurant along with Seon. But Yoo-soo, clearly annoyed, said that if he was already with Seon, they could eat another day. However, she added that there was something she wanted to tell So-woo. Nearly having a heart attack, he asked what it was. With a mischievous look, Yoo-soo teased him, saying he needed to decide who he was going to stick with. Once again, So-woo became flustered and stammered that they could absolutely have lunch together, assuring her that he always ate with Seon and she wouldn't mind. So-yoon, stunned by what she was hearing, thought it might be better to slap him to wake him up to reality. Yoo-soo celebrated his response, saying that if he was serious, she was truly happy about it. But she couldn't resist mocking Seon, giving her a sly smile and saying she felt sorry for her but that it was fine, they could eat as much as they wanted. Having already ruined the mood, Yoo-soo suggested they head to the restaurant because she was hungry. So-woo, ever the good friend, said goodbye to Seon, trying to ease the tension, though she didn't seem too affected. As soon as the protagonist left, Yoo-soo glanced back at Seon with a cheeky smile, while Seon muttered that So-woo was an idiot. In her mind, Yoo-soo thought that, despite being friends for ages, So-woo would undoubtedly abandon Seon the moment she showed up. Sometime later, after a feast fit for royalty, the two of them talked about how the restaurant's food was surrealistically delicious. Feeling delighted, So-woo said he was glad she enjoyed it but wanted to know what was so important that she had to tell him. Smiling, Yoo-soo blushed slightly and admitted that, in truth, it was nothing. Seeing the surprised look on So-woo's face, she added that she was sorry but had lied. With a mischievous look, she confessed that So-woo was always with Seon, and if she hadn't lied, she might never have had the chance to eat with him. Hearing this, the boy turned as red as a pepper and told her she didn't need to do that. Next time, she just needed to say so, and they could go out together. Giving him a seductive glance, Yusu suggested that instead of having lunch next time, they could go out for drinks. That completely shook Sogu's world. He never expected this, especially since he genuinely loved her. By nightfall, Yusu was with her boyfriend, Minji, who asked if she really went out to eat with Sogu. With her trademark disdain, she replied that she did, since Minji wasn't there and she didn't want to eat alone. Clearly annoyed, Minji asked why she didn't just eat with both Sogu and Seyun. Yusu scoffed, saying that Seyun always stared at her in a weird way and that it wouldn't have been pleasant to eat with such a ridiculous girl. Pushing Minji further, Yusu teased that when she invited Sogu, he didn't even think twice before leading Seyun behind. That drove Minji completely mad, and he snapped, asking what the hell she was talking about. Yusu smugly replied that, even though Seyun and Sogu had been friends for ages, she was still left behind without hesitation. She added that Seyun had terrible taste for liking him. Trying to vent his frustration, Minji barked that she had talked enough and needed to shut up now. At that moment, Yusu wondered why he was acting like an idiot after hearing this about Seyun. After a long conversation about love, Minji asked Yusu if she thought Sogu would agree to go out with her if she asked him. When Yusu confirmed, Minji suggested they invite Sogu and Seyun for a weekend together. The next day, the protagonist, concerned about his friend, asked if she'd like to go to the restaurant they missed the previous night. But, annoyed, Seyun told him to get lost and not even think about it. After all, he left her eating alone without any warning. Defensive, Sogu responded that she was the one who said she didn't want to join them, and now she was questioning his loyalty just because she was left alone. Furious, she smacked him, asking if abandoning a friend for a girl counted as loyalty, which, let's face it, it doesn't. Embarrassed, he apologized, admitting that he had been blinded by love for a moment. Still irritated, she said the whole situation was a mess and that Sogu must be crazy since Yusu was Minji's girlfriend. But, catching both of them completely off guard, a voice suddenly interrupted, asking what they were saying about his girlfriend. It was Minji. Seeing him there, the two froze, looking as if they'd just seen a ghost, unsure of how to respond. Minji, however, casually said it was fine and that he wanted to share an idea. He explained that his father wouldn't be home the following weekend, so maybe they could all hang out since it had been a while. The protagonist, gathering his courage, replied that they hadn't been getting along recently, so they shouldn't count on him being there. Seyun, taking the opportunity, also said she wouldn't be able to join their little gathering. But Minji, with a sly grin, suggested that maybe Sogu would change his mind if Yusu were there too. Predictably, this left the protagonist absolutely furious, unsure of how to respond. Minji then proposed that, since the four of them had never gone out together, it would be the perfect time to have a barbecue and settle their differences once and for all. But Seyun was still refusing, saying she wasn't interested because her friend was clearly uncomfortable. At that moment, something caught her attention. It was Sogu himself, startling her as he suddenly declared, with noticeable anger, that they should go. And, of course, he said it with nothing but fury in his voice. Minji was left bewildered, watching the two argue. Sogu insisted that Seyun was going to try his barbecue, while she kept asking if he had lost his mind, adamant that she didn't want to go. A few days later, the weekend finally arrived. As they made their way to Minji's house, inspired by Sogu and Minji's conversation with Seyun, the protagonist commented that the place seemed much bigger than the last time he was there. It had been so long since they'd visited. Seyun, surprised by his sudden confidence, told them they should stop stalling and just go inside. As she asked her friend what he was up to with all of this, a voice from inside called out, asking if they had arrived. It was Minji, greeting them with a noble demeanor and saying they were very welcome in his home. Behind Minji stood Yusu, wearing a sweet smile and softly saying, "Hello." The protagonist immediately returned her greeting, blushing furiously. At this point, neither Seyun nor Sogu had any clue about what was truly about to happen that day. In fact, the protagonist himself didn't realize that this seemingly simple invitation would completely change his life, just like that, in the blink of an eye. By nightfall, the barbecue was sizzling on the grill, and the mouth-watering aroma of roasted meat filled the air, making everyone's stomachs growl with anticipation. Seyun and Yusu, however, remained at odds, each staying in their own corner. While one salted the meat, the other set the table. Yusu couldn't help but glance at Seon and silently admit to herself that Seon really had an amazing figure. Meanwhile, inside the house, Sohoo was busy testing his special dinner, thrilled about the surprise he had prepared. The food was turning out exceptionally well, and he excitedly exclaimed that everyone was going to love it. While the protagonist was in the kitchen, Minji, as always, was acting like a big shot, spritzing himself with cologne and fixing his appearance. But the truth was, his reason for putting on cologne wasn't just to smell nice, there was something much deeper behind it. He remembered the time when they were still friends, and Seon had leaned in to sniff his neck to catch the scent of his cologne. As Minji came downstairs, he asked Sohoo which specific dish he was preparing. Without hesitation, Sohoo replied that he was making bango because Yusu had mentioned loving the dish, and he wanted to surprise her. Realizing he had said too much, the protagonist quickly apologized, saying he knew Yusu was Minji's girlfriend and that he'd keep his feelings to himself. Minji immediately responded, telling him there was no need to feel bad in questioning why he didn't just admit how he felt about Yusu. In fact, Minji suggested that Sohoo should confess to her. Hearing this, Sohoo was so shocked he nearly fell over. Minji, ever the composed cuckold, finished by asking the protagonist if he wanted to be with Yusu. If that was the case, he'd better hurry up with the dish since she was eager to taste it. Sohoo, completely at a loss for words, just stared at Minji. When the dish was finally ready, Yusu quickly tasted it, and judging by her expression, it was absolutely delicious. She immediately exclaimed how amazing it was, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Amid the wave of compliments, the protagonist became flustered, shyly saying he was happy she liked it since he had put so much effort into it. Watching Yusu's enthusiasm, Minji wondered to himself if this was all a ploy by Sohoo to win over his girlfriend. Filled with jealousy, he rushed to taste the pasta himself, scoffing beforehand that it was probably basic and overrated. But the moment he tried it, the flavor was surreal. The guy nearly transcended with how delicious the pasta was. Worried, he silently wondered how that chubby guy could create something so incredible. "What is this, man? The protagonist is actually pretty impressive." Minji grumbled to himself, now fuming, realizing that Sohoo was continuously improving in the kitchen. Seeing both girls devouring his dish, Sohoo was startled and jokingly warned them to slow down, or they'd end up choking. And, sure enough, Yusu actually choked. The protagonist immediately rushed to help her, while Minji sulked in the corner, consumed with jealousy. Naturally, Minji began cursing Sohoo in his head, wondering who that pig thought he was. Later, as the group gathered inside the house and toasted to lighten the chaotic atmosphere, Seon teased Sohoo, saying he shouldn't hit on her just because he was drunk. The boy, exasperated, retorted, asking if she was joking and accusing her of having no filter in the things she said. Yusu, watching the two teasing each other, remarked that they made a lovely couple since both of them were gorgeous. But the protagonist, a little tipsy and unintentionally upsetting his friend, blurted out that Yusu was 100 times prettier. Amid the tension, Minji suggested they play a drinking game. Hearing this, the protagonist got excited, saying it was about time they played something fun to liven up the night. Soyun, however, wasn't thrilled with the idea and snapped back, asking why they couldn't just focus on drinking instead of playing games. Minji replied that he didn't like drinking too much, but if they played a game, it would make him drink more. He then proposed that whoever lost the game would have to take off an item of clothing. Everyone was stunned. The protagonist and Seyoon were visibly alarmed by Minji's suggestion. After all, no one expected something like that. Even Minji's girlfriend, Yusu, stared at him in disbelief, shocked that he'd say such a thing. Seyoon quickly called him out, saying he was way too drunk, adding that his girlfriend was right there, and yet he was making these kinds of comments. Smiling slyly, Minji asked when else they'd do something like this if not when drunk. "What kind of argument is that, dude?" He then claimed it was no big deal since only the losers would have to face the penalty. Sohoo and Seyoon were completely flabbergasted by his remark, and Seyoon retorted that it was utter madness. Provoking her further, Minji taunted, asking if she was afraid because she didn't trust her own body. Furious at his audacity, Seyoon stood up, showing off her figure, and declared that everything he said was complete nonsense because she was incredibly proud of her body. Feeling a little embarrassed, Minji backtracked, saying he was just joking and that it was meant to make the game more exciting. Acting cocky, he added that since he was going to win anyway, he'd already take off his watch because, as a man, he had to honor his values. He went on to explain that if anyone didn't want to take off their clothes, they could just answer a question instead. With a laugh, Seyun removed her hair clip, saying it was all fine by her. Concerned for his friend, Sohu asked if she was okay, reminding her that her parents would see her in the morning. Before starting the game, Minji told Sohu not to overdo it because he wanted everyone to feel comfortable and have fun. Sure, we believe that. Looking at Sohu's well-built physique, Minji asked if he would actually take off his clothes if he lost. Irritated, Sohu retorted, asking what kind of question that was, adding that he wasn't ashamed of his body. Minji responded that if that was the case, it was fine, and he would start asking the questions. Minji decided Seyun would be the first to answer, which startled her. He asked why she was so attached to Sohu, adding that she couldn't say it was just because they were friends. Seyun was left speechless, while Sohu glared at Minji, asking why he always had to target him. Yusu thought the same, why bring up that question now? To everyone's surprise, Seyun sighed, stood up, and opted to take the penalty without answering. Frustrated, Sohu asked if she was okay, but Seyun brushed it off, saying she was fine, though her actions left Minji visibly uneasy. Yusu, however, remarked that Seyun really had a beautiful body. Feeling a bit bitter, Minji commented that if Seyun chose to take the penalty instead of answering, then her reason for sticking by Sohu must be very important. With a dreamy look on his face, he asked if she liked Sohu that much. Irritated, Seyun snapped that she had already done the penalty, so why was he still asking questions? Embarrassed, Minji apologized, admitting she was right in promising to stop. But in his mind, he wondered what on earth was going on and what Seyun was hiding. Confused, Sohu asked Seyun why she didn't just take off her socks instead of removing an entire piece of clothing. Realizing he was right, Seyun asked Minji if she could put her clothes back on and just remove her socks. But Minji smirked and said it wouldn't be fun that way. Watching all this unfold, Sohu began wondering if it seemed like Seyun had deeper feelings for him. Next, it was Seyun's turn to ask a question, and she directed it at Yusu. To Yusu's surprise, Seyun boldly asked if the reason she was dating Minji was because his father owned so many restaurants. Even Minji was taken aback by the question and turned away awkwardly. The protagonist was completely bewildered by such a brazen question. This girl really was something else. Unbuttoning her blouse, Yusu replied that she wasn't going to answer the question, not even think about it. Minji, embarrassed, asked why she wouldn't just answer or if, in fact, her father's wealth did play a role. Yusu then said she was already doing her part of the deal, so he shouldn't ask her any more questions. The protagonist, worried, asked Yusu if she was really going to do that and told Minji he shouldn't let his girlfriend do such a thing in front of everyone. But Yusu, smiling mischievously, replied that it was a gift for Sohu and that he should feel flattered. Sohu was shocked, stammering as he asked what on earth she was talking about. As Yusu went through with her penalty, the protagonist was utterly embarrassed. Minji, on the other hand, added that every time Sohu looked at a painting, he would remember Yusu's face. Annoyed, Seyun asked Minji why he kept telling Sohu to focus on his girlfriend. It was definitely weird. Minji explained that it was because Sohu clearly liked Yusu a lot and should just let it go for the sake of their friendship. Yusu shut down the argument, saying it was time to stop fighting because it was now her turn to ask a question. Turning to Sohu and catching him completely off guard, she asked, point blank, who he would choose to talk about drones, Yusu or Seyun. Even Seyun was stunned by the question. Was this girl seriously asking something like that in front of her boyfriend? Seyun thought the whole situation was insane and that Yusu was just taking advantage of being drunk to act this way. Minji, also drunk, just stared at his girlfriend with a goofy smile, clearly not understanding anything. Meanwhile, Sohu had no idea how to respond. He was bright red with embarrassment. Locking eyes with him and with a seductive look, Yusu asked if he wasn't going to answer, making the situation even more awkward. Flustered, Sohu stammered, asking how she expected him to answer something like that so quickly. Minji, smiling slyly, then asked Sohu what the problem was. Was it because Minji was there, all nervous and watching? The protagonist reflected that, of course, he wasn't going to choose Yusu, but he was far too shy to answer the question. He'd always seen her as part of the family and never felt anything beyond that. However, he worried that if he had to take off his shirt, Yusu might end up hating him for his physique. Desperate, he looked at Seiyun and asked her to switch places with him just this once. But the girl gave him a swift kick, telling him not to make such a ridiculous proposal or she'd launch him into the stratosphere. After all, he was the one who wanted to play the game. Extremely embarrassed, Sohu admitted that since he couldn't answer the question, he would take off his shirt instead. Even Minji was surprised and asked if Sohu was really going to remove his shirt in front of everyone. Acting cocky as usual, Minji joked that since he was obviously going to win, he might as well start by taking off his watch because, as a man, he had to honor his values. Extremely embarrassed, Sohu finally admits that since he can't answer, he'll take off his shirt. Even Minji is surprised and asks if Sohu was seriously going to do that in front of everyone. When the protagonist finally follows through, everyone is both impressed and a bit shocked by the sight. Completely drunk, Sohu ends up doing something he would never have done while sober, showing off his body, which he's always been self-conscious about. Feeling disheartened by everyone's unblinking stares, he remembers how much he has always hated his body. Trying to lighten the mood, Seiyun decides to tease him, jokingly asking if he's a golem for being that big. Feeling down, he responds that he knows his body is disgusting and apologizes for showing it. But Yusu, ever the optimist, says that's not true and asks why he called himself disgusting, pointing out that no one had said such a thing. She even shows him a picture of a teddy bear on her phone, saying he reminded her of it, cute and cuddly. Hearing this, the protagonist's eyes start to well up with tears, and, feeling a bit awkward, he asks if she's being serious. Yusu turns to Minji and firmly tells him they should stop the game since Sohu clearly isn't doing well. She then decides to take Sohu outside for some fresh air. Minji, completely nonchalant, says it's fine and that they can go, quietly thinking that he isn't jealous because he believes Sohu doesn't stand a chance with Yusu. Deep down, though, he feels a bit lucky because of this. Watching from the sidelines, Soyun begins to reflect that, in the end, Yusu might actually have a kind heart. Outside, Yusu asks the protagonist why he likes her so much. Looking into her eyes, Sohu blurts out that she's incredibly beautiful. Yusu, however, replies that she thought he liked her for something deeper, not just her looks, and says that it makes him just like everyone else. Shocked, Sohu tries to explain that it's not just about her beauty. As the conversation continues, he ends up sharing his entire story about his mother, from his childhood traumas to the strange dreams he's had. Feeling guilty for saying too much, he asks if his story bothered her. Holding his hand gently, Yusu reassures him that it didn't bother her at all. She suggests that if he ever misses his mother, he shouldn't hesitate to reach out to her. Overwhelmed, Sohu thanks her, unsure of what else to say. To his surprise, Yusu stands up and gives him a tight hug. Then, she asks if he'd like to recreate the dreams he's had about his mother and also questions whether he's truly just friends with Seiyun or if there's something more. Embarrassed, Sohu stammers that he sees Seiyun as part of his family. And, well, you know how it goes, what Yusu offered was practically irresistible. The boy accepts and, well, that's that. Meanwhile, inside the house, Soyun was napping after drinking a bit too much. Minji, also drunk, sat nearby, watching her with a strange look in his eyes. He moved closer, sat beside her, and began gently stroking her face as she slept. Looking at her up close, Minji reflected that he couldn't bring himself to kiss her, wondering if it was because he felt sorry for Sohu. Not long after, his emotions overwhelmed him, and he began crying near her, frustrated and upset. Outside, Sohu was feeling incredibly embarrassed and nervously asked Yusu what they would do if Minji showed up. She reassured him, saying she felt awful after hearing about his mother's story and wanted to help him heal from the trauma. Sohu appreciated her concern but was still anxious about the situation. She explained that when Minji was away, he often slept in his parents' room and suggested that Sohu could stay there if he needed to. Speechless and flustered, Sohu was clearly uncomfortable. Later, Sohu fell asleep on the couch but woke up suddenly, feeling unsettled. He remembered Yusu's invitation to her room. Summoning his courage, he finally went upstairs. As he approached the room, he overheard Yusu and Minji talking about thrones, and it was enough to completely unnerve him. Traumatized, he fled the house like a rocket at 3 in the morning, terrified and confused. Minji, noticing Sohu's abrupt departure, assumed he had seen them and run away in panic. Yusu complained, saying she couldn't believe she had to witness such a scene. Their plan was simple: disturb Sohu enough to push him toward enlisting in the army. In return, Yusu would gain managerial control over one of Minji's father's restaurants during his vacations. Additionally, Minji hoped to irritate Seyun, assuming she would be angry at Sohu for abandoning her. The next day, Seyun tried calling Sohu but couldn't reach him. She began to wonder why he had left so suddenly and decided to go to his house. Upon arriving, she was shocked to find Minji and Yusu sleeping naked. Horrified, she quickly left the room and tried calling Sohu again, but with no luck. Frustrated, Seyun vowed that if she found Sohu, she would give him a piece of her mind or maybe even a beating. Meanwhile, back at his home, Sohu was devastated, crying and plotting revenge against Yusu and Minji. At school, the professor noticed Sohu's absence and asked Seyun if she knew what had happened. Seyun explained that she had tried to contact him but couldn't reach him. Concerned, the professor suggested that Seyun step in for Sohu to help out. Minji, meanwhile, celebrated the fact that Sohu missed his favorite class, declaring that he would now be the professor's new favorite student. After class, Seyun went to Sohu's house, knocking on the door and calling his name, but he remained in bed, refusing to move. A neighbor, irritated by the commotion, asked what was going on and threatened to call the police. Embarrassed, Seyun realized she wasn't going to reach him and gave up, wondering why Sohu was doing this to her. Inside, Sohu was still crying, consumed by thoughts of the humiliation he had endured. Eventually, he noticed his phone was off, and when he turned it back on, he found several messages from Seyun. Feeling guilty for worrying her, he also discovered that Minji had become the professor's assistant, gaining fame due to his well-known father. This news hurt Sohu deeply, and seeing the negative comments about himself only made him feel worse. Angry, he threw his phone across the room, deciding he wanted nothing to do with any of it. Meanwhile, Minji, oblivious to the turmoil he was causing, began flirting with the professor, creating even more problems for Sohu. The protagonist, still traumatized, started hearing malicious comments every time he left the house, further intensifying his anguish. One day, as he returned home, he found Seyun sitting in front of his house, exhausted. Seeing her, he tried to act tough and told her to move out of the way. Furious, Seyun stood up and stormed toward him, but to his surprise, she hugged him tightly, full of affection. Calling him a fool, she demanded to know why he had been ignoring her calls and making her so worried. Sohu didn't respond immediately, but his expression showed that her presence truly comforted him. Looking into her eyes, he asked if she really liked him as more than a friend. Blushing, Seyun pretended not to understand, asking where he got such an idea and why he was saying that. Curious, the protagonist pressed further, asking why Seyun was so obsessed with him. Flustered, she replied that it wasn't a crime to care about a good friend, especially since he had been missing for days. Somewhat irritated, he asked if she was really just a friend, reminding her of the dream he had about her. On the defensive, Seyun shot back that it wasn't her fault, it was his, for choosing to dream about such things. But breaking through her barrier, he added that he knew it wasn't just a dream and that it didn't happen only once. Hearing this, Seyun looked as though she'd been slapped, completely stunned. Meanwhile, Minji started recalling the night when Sohu confessed his feelings for Yusu. The three of them had been drunk, heading home, and Minji had tried to wake Seyun, but she was so out of it she couldn't respond. He noticed that Sohu was unconsciously sucking on his lips, which he found odd, but he brushed it off, assuming Sohu was dreaming about food as expected of a piggy. Minji left but realized he'd forgotten his phone at Sohu's house. When he returned to retrieve it, he stumbled upon Sohu and Seyun replicating something Sohu's mother used to do. Witnessing the scene shattered Minji's heart, leaving him even more bitter than before. The sight left him completely shocked and unsure of how to react. After that day, knowing his friend had feelings for Yusu, Minji invited her out for coffee. He wanted to propose a plan to help each other. He brought up her social media, mentioning the many photos she posted with her father and how much she seemed to admire him. Yusu confirmed it, saying she truly liked Tae-sun a lot. Minji suggested that his father needed a manager for one of his restaurants. Yusu replied that there were many competitors for the position and it seemed impossible, but she wouldn't give up so easily. Minji concluded by saying he wanted to help make it happen, but in return, she would pretend to date him for a few months. Yusu, confused, asked what he meant by that. He explained that he wanted to inflict some serious pain on someone who liked her. Back with Sohu, he explained to Seyun that what happened frequently wasn't random and that alcohol was just a trigger. Seyun, speechless and in disbelief, couldn't process what she was hearing. Extremely embarrassed, she wondered how she'd ever face Sohu again after this. Meanwhile, Sohu began questioning whether he should have told her at all, as the situation now felt far too awkward. The atmosphere grew tense as the two drank in silence. The protagonist eventually fell asleep, only to wake up to Seyun hugging him. He asked if she hadn't gone home, and the girl, drunk, replied that she didn't do that again. Saddened, she asked if he thought she was strange. So-woo hugged her back and confessed, saying he pretended not to notice things to avoid making their friendship awkward. Seizing the moment, Seon suggested that since he also liked her, they could be together and he wouldn't need to rely on powdered milk anymore. The connection between them was so strong that, despite the odd exchange, the mood stayed relatively normal. The next day, their professor noticed So-woo's absence and became concerned, as it was unusual for him to miss class. Minji, on the other hand, was pleased but couldn't help wondering why Seon was also absent. Realizing that Seon wasn't there either, Minji grew curious about what was going on. He started feeling jealous, suspecting that they were together even when skipping class. After a long night, So-woo felt shy and couldn't even look Seon in the eye, unsure of how to treat her. Despite everything that had happened, they were still friends, but the air between them carried an undeniable tension. Unable to come to a clear conclusion, So-woo felt completely lost. So-yoon was equally embarrassed and didn't know how to react. After all the awkwardness, they decided to move forward. Before leaving, Seon asked him to keep his promise to give up powdered milk. He agreed, saying he would definitely quit because he was a man of his word. Later, as So-woo sat in his room using his computer, he saw an advertisement for military recruitment. Reflecting on everything he had been through, he decided to join the army. It seemed like the best way to escape everything, Minji's idea all alone, and he couldn't handle the pressure of his new relationship with Seon or the malicious comments anymore. After the incident with Seon, they decided to take some time apart, the first time they'd been separated since becoming friends. They even stopped attending classes together, each going their own way. And it was clear from Minji's smug smile that he was thrilled with the situation. Look at that grin. Although the separation felt strange, both So-woo and Seon knew it was necessary to protect a friendship that meant so much to them. The night before So-woo's enlistment, even though he told Seon about his decision, their farewell felt more like a good luck than a moment of disappointment. Seon, full of care, looked at him and asked him to take care of himself, believing he would do well in the army. As the protagonist sat there, Seon said goodbye, leaving a somber atmosphere behind. Their years-long friendship was coming to an abrupt pause. Before parting, So-woo mentioned that he had quit powdered milk, as promised. Smiling, Seon said that was good news and it had been a while since he made such a decision. And So-woo bid farewell to Seon before joining the armed forces. 18 months later, a lively reporter announced that someone had been discharged from the army after completing the mandatory 18 months of service. The reporter hurried to the checkpoint, saying that someone was about to appear. As the soldier approached, the crowd began taking pictures, mistaking him for a celebrity. Desperate, the soldier shouted that he wasn't an idol, just a regular person being confused for someone else. When the crowd realized he wasn't a Hollywood star, they apologized, saying his physique was so impressive that they had assumed otherwise. And, to everyone's delight, it was none other than So-woo. As he revealed himself, the crowd marveled, commenting that his body was far too remarkable to belong to an ordinary person. 3 months after his discharge, the protagonist returned to college in the following spring. To his surprise, his former professor was teaching his class again, now for first-year students. On the first day, she suggested introductions since no one knew each other yet. While taking attendance, she noticed So-woo's name on the list but couldn't see him in the room. Concerned, she wondered where he was. To her surprise, So-woo raised his hand, saying he was there. The professor, shocked, dropped her tablet on the floor upon seeing the transformation of her former student. Completely stunned, she asked if it was really So-woo, her student from the past. Radiating confidence, he introduced himself, explaining that he wasn't a freshman and had been discharged from the armed forces in December. His classmates began whispering among themselves, impressed by his striking appearance. The professor, without hesitation, asked why he had lost so much weight. So-woo smiled, explaining that he had an intense experience in the army that led to his transformation. In the hallway, a group of girls was fawning over a senior, but their attention quickly shifted to So-woo as he entered, drawing everyone's gaze. Approaching Minji, who didn't recognize him at first, So-woo greeted her. When she finally realized who he was, Minji was stunned and asked if he had really lost that much weight. So-woo confirmed and, while saying goodbye, mentioned that he had an appointment with Seon. As he walked away, Minji was left in awe, wondering what he had done to look so good. Meanwhile, Seon was on her phone, waiting for So-woo. When he arrived, exuding confidence, he complimented her appearance and teasingly asked if she was dating someone. Embarrassed, she replied that So-woo looked even better and remarked that this was the most anticipated meeting after a year and a half apart. While Sohu had been working hard on his transformation in the armed forces, his friends had continued their lives at university. Professor Nahara had taken over as the head of the department, earning much more prestige. Curious, Sayan asked Sohu if his changes had all been part of a plan since he didn't even let her visit during the summer break. Feeling guilty, the protagonist apologized for being distant while in the army, explaining that he was deeply focused and didn't want anything to shake his determination. After a moment of silence, Sayan called him silly, prompting Sohu to quickly apologize again. Curious, she then asked if he had really stopped drinking powdered milk as he had promised. With a sparkle in his eye, Sohu proudly replied that he hated powdered milk now and, thanks to his new physique, wouldn't touch it even under torture. Soyun laughed, genuinely happy to finally hear him say that. Suddenly, Sohu's phone rang. It was Yu-Su. When he answered, she called him Patrick and said she missed him. Laughing, Sohu asked if she really called him that. She confirmed, explaining that she was the only one who could reference the famous character from SpongeBob SquarePants. They arranged a friendly meeting to catch up. Sohu apologized to Seyun, saying he genuinely wanted to spend time with her but had to attend an opening party for his department. Hiding her jealousy, Seyun assured him it was fine and told him to go without worrying about her. Still, she wondered what was happening to her heart. At the party, Sohu and Mary showed an old photo of him from when he was still overweight. Everyone was amazed by his transformation. Embarrassed, Sohu asked Mary not to show it again, but the girls complimented him, saying he was adorable even back then. A blonde girl observed Sohu from a distance, clearly admiring him. Mary, slightly tipsy, teased him about his past and joked that he might gain weight again. Sohu, determined, replied that it would never happen. As they flirted, Mary suggested he come to her house to help her with her workouts. Meanwhile, Sayan reflected on how much Sohu had changed and how she hadn't done anything to keep up with him. 2 days later, while walking through the city, Yusu spotted Sohu at an establishment and was stunned by his new appearance. Her heart raced as she introduced herself. Minji, laughing about Sohu's story, mentioned his commitment to Seyun. Concerned, Yusu asked Minji why he cared so much about Sohu, who had always been a chubby guy. Minji, still laughing, said that even so, Sohu had always been annoying to her. Despite this, Yusu planned to tease Sohu when they met again. During their meeting, she brought up things she had said in the past, reminding him of how she used to try to control him. Sohu, however, refused to let go of the past, especially because he had trusted her. When Yusu touched on sensitive topics, he responded that he no longer dreamed about his mother but about her instead, leaving Yusu speechless. Stunned by Sohu's statement, Yusu, in a moment of weakness, tried to get closer to him, but he pulled away, saying he needed to leave. Desperate to maintain her composure, she tried to convince him to stay, but Sohu suggested they both head home. As he walked away, Yusu wondered what had happened to the insecure boy she once knew, who now left her so intrigued. Acting on impulse, she ran after him, grabbed his hand, and begged him not to go. This made her reflect on how she had never chased after Minji in the same way. While running, she complimented Sohu's scent, recalling how she used to call him smelly. Sohu's anger resurfaced briefly, but he held back, thinking that the irony of his transformation was undeniable. The next day, Seyun was working out, her mind focused on finally competing in the national culinary competition this year. Her thoughts drifted back to the previous year, when she had come in second place while Minji had taken first. The pain of that loss still consumed her. A random boy tried to encourage her, saying that Sohu would be on her team next year. Irritated, Seyun snapped back, vowing never to team up with Minji again and determined to defeat him at all costs. Meanwhile, during the cooking class, Sohu was already present. The professor asked the students to pair up for an assignment. A petite blonde girl approached Sohu and shyly asked to be his partner. Surprised, Sohu agreed. The girl, calling him sir, was quickly corrected by him. She revealed that she came from Minji's father's school and shared that all the girls there adored Minji, but she was the only true fan of Sohu. Embarrassed by her unexpected adoration, Sohu didn't know how to respond. The night before, after persisting calls from Minji, Soyeon finally picked up the phone. Flustered and annoyed, Minji demanded to know where she had been and why she hadn't answered. Soyeon tried to explain that she had been at home, but Minji wasn't satisfied with her answer, insisting that she should have called him back. Trying to deflect, Soyeon claimed she had been cleaning the bathroom while taking a shower, though Minji's persistence was beginning to scare her. Eventually, he gave up and asked if she had managed to mess with Sohu's psyche. Standing awkwardly in front of the protagonist, Soyeon replied that she had, adding that Sohu was practically her little puppy. At that moment, Sohu thought to himself, "Does she really think I didn't know she was talking about me?" To add to the scene, Sayun suddenly screamed, visibly shocked by the situation. This, of course, was all part of the protagonist's plan. At that moment, Yusu began shouting frantically, urging Sohu to stop his antics before Minji figured out what was going on. But the protagonist, locking eyes with Yusu, reflected that she truly deserved this punishment. Hearing the strange commotion, Minji asked Yusu what was happening. Scrambling for an excuse, Yusu blurted out that there was a giant cockroach on the bathroom wall, and that's why she had screamed. Curious, Minji asked if she could take a picture of the bug and send it to him. Yusu, still trying to cover up, claimed she had flushed the insect after killing it, so there was no way to send a photo. After hearing yet another round of flimsy excuses, Minji started reflecting on what was really going on. Eventually, he decided to end the call, telling Yusu that she must be tired from taming Sohu and that he would hang up. Annoyed, Yusu complained about how she had been trying to talk to Minji, yet Sohu kept making noise to disrupt their conversation. After all the commotion, Sohu went to tell the suspicious professor everything that had happened with Yusu, mocking the situation. He admitted he was still trembling from the adrenaline because he had never experienced anything like it before. But as he spoke with the professor, the mood shifted. At Minji's house, when he tried to talk with Yusu, an argument broke out between them. Frustrated, Minji eventually gave up, lying down and complaining that she had changed so suddenly, as if overnight. Caught off guard, Yusu asked if he really thought she had changed that much. Looking into her eyes, Minji asked if she had truly taught Sohu a lesson or if the spell had backfired on the sorcerer. Hearing this left Yusu completely stunned. She didn't know where to hide her face, let alone what to say to her boyfriend. Still in shock, she stood up without saying a word, looking almost ghostly. Frustrated, she yelled at Minji, telling him to never suggest such a thing again, that it was deeply unpleasant, and that he shouldn't dare make that connection. Sohu, smiling, chimed in, saying it was all just a joke and asking why she was so serious, especially since she had claimed to have taught him a lesson. With tension thick in the air, Yusu replied that she knew he was joking, but that everything she did was just in Act 2. A few days later, the protagonist finally went to visit his father. It had been ages since he last saw the old man, and even after returning from the armed forces, he hadn't stopped by. To his surprise, his father was still a simple taxi driver, as always. However, when he noticed the filth inside the car, he realized the old man had become completely lazy. The protagonist reflected that his father hadn't driven the car for at least 5 days. When he entered his father's house, he found the man lying on the floor, surrounded by bottles and drinks, and thought to himself how utterly pathetic he was. The protagonist's secret to being such a good cook lay in his mother's culinary skills. She was always praised for her cooking, and people would often say she should open a restaurant. Most of his talent was inherited from her. But after his mother left, his life turned into a complete mess. The reason for this was his father's constant insults, blaming the protagonist for his mother's departure. His father would throw things on the floor, ordering the boy to clean up, and telling him he was worthless. The old man threatened that if he didn't stop being a disgrace, he'd be kicked out of the house. Cooking became the only way for the protagonist to survive during his childhood. Soyun's parents, upon seeing the boy crying, would always ask if his father had hit him again and what was wrong with the old man. With tears in his eyes, the little boy would beg his uncles to teach him how to make a wonderful stew. Surprised, they asked why he wanted to learn such a thing, saying it was too dangerous for a child his age. Through his sobs, the boy explained that if he didn't learn, his father would beat him. And so, Soyun's parents became Sohu's first cooking instructors. Soyun herself always stood up for Sohu when they were kids, especially when his father was drunk. After learning that his father hit him, she started visiting Sohu's house more often to try to protect him. The girl truly was a pillar of strength for him during that difficult time when even his father had turned his back on him. Thanks to Soyun, he was able to endure the hell his father put him through and the trauma his mother caused him. Back in the present, the protagonist visited his father to prepare one last tofu stew. When the old man saw the dish, he hurried over to check it out, but next to the pot was a note. Upon reading it, he realized it was a farewell letter, a final attempt to cut ties with his father. Afterward, Sohu called his best friend, Sayun, and told her he had finally freed himself from that horrible man. He invited her out for drinks to celebrate the severing of this toxic relationship, leaving her completely surprised. The protagonist casually mentions that he'd really like to see Sayun go back to Minji. At that moment, the conversation shifts to a girl named Rayhan, who is quite famous on Instagram. Soyun adds that this girl attended the same school as Minji's father, which gets Sohu all excited. After repeating the girl's name several times, he finally remembers that she was the first analyst featured in that absolute palette episode of the show Masters of the Senses. Back then, Sohu was still a bit chubby, and the three of them were amazed by her skills. Minji then asks Seyun why she brought up this story out of nowhere. Soyun replies that when the team is formed for the national competition, she believes the blonde's presence could be very useful. What disappoints Sohu, however, is when Yusu comments that Seyun and he would likely be working together this time. Glancing at Minji's face, she notes that he's still sensitive when it comes to this girl. But boldly, Minji declares that he doesn't care about that and that it would be delightful to steal Seyun away from Sohu again. Later, Sayan starts scrolling through Sohu's profile, liking all his photos. During the night of drinks, she asks if he really cut ties with his father, reminding him that it's still the only family he has. The boy responds that yes, he's happy being an orphan and that the man isn't part of his life anymore. Leaving Sayan both flustered and emotional, he adds that, in truth, she's the only family he has left. Trying to change the mood, he remarks that it's been a long time since they've gone out for drinks, and now it's time to celebrate. Irritated, Sayan snaps that while he says she's his only family, he didn't bother to keep in touch when he was in the army, and now, out of nowhere, he suddenly misses her. Completely out of herself, Sayan asks if he's messing with her, while Sohu tries to lighten the mood. Embarrassed, he explains that he didn't ignore her existence, saying they both needed some time apart and that it was good for them. Soyun calms down slightly but retorts that she already knew that. However, she points out that he stayed away for a whole year and didn't give her any updates. She acknowledges his desire for revenge against Minji but says involving her in that was a bad idea. The protagonist confesses that he had a genuine reason for not reaching out. Saddened, he adds that there wasn't a single moment in the army when he didn't think about her. Making her even more flustered, he continues, admitting that he tried several times to call her during his breaks or vacations but would get so overwhelmed by how much he missed her that he couldn't think straight, let alone focus on his training. When Soyun hears this, she's completely shocked and at a loss for words. As Sohu finishes speaking, a tense silence hangs in the air. Finally, feeling awkward, Sayan brushes it off, asking him to stop with his excuses. Sohu, equally embarrassed, stays quiet for a moment. Soyun then admits she understands what happened but points out that Sohu never brought up what they had experienced. She adds that she's already very distant from her friend Minji and doesn't want to lose her friendship with Sohu. She also clarifies that nothing more than friendship ever existed between her and Minji. This irritates Sohu, who questions if she really thinks it's possible to pretend there were no deeper feelings in their friendship. To leave her even more speechless, he asks if she truly believes the excuse that it was just a mistake caused by alcohol. Losing patience, Sayan snaps back that Sohu is funny but makes no sense, reminding him that he was the one who acted like nothing happened between them for a year and a half. The protagonist replies that he spent all that time building up the courage to finally confess how he really felt, which hurt him deeply. The argument heats up when Seyun counters that it was Sohu who said he didn't want to contact her because he didn't want to miss her. Perhaps due to the alcohol, her voice gets louder and the people around them start noticing. Realizing this, Sohu signals for her to lower her voice, as everyone is staring. In a major plot twist, Seyun suddenly shouts at Sohu, telling him to stop and admitting that, deep down, there were days when she missed him a lot. To shock him even further, she adds that it would be a complete lie to say she only wanted to be his friend. What truly makes her sad is thinking about it, and she confesses that she missed him so much. Soyun explains that she thought it would be easier to keep him as a friend forever than to risk a romance and lose him completely. That's why, ever since then, she has been trying to move on, pretending like nothing happened. At this point, Sohu's ego soars to the skies, and, slightly embarrassed, he responds that he understands what she means. With the tension still lingering from their argument, the two start sipping whiskey. Breaking the silence, Sohu says that it wouldn't be good for her to keep trying so hard. He adds that she shouldn't force things to go back to how they were before because what happened between them shouldn't be treated as a taboo to overcome. The protagonist wraps up by saying there's no need to keep bringing it up, and if she truly wants things to return to how they were, they could continue as just friends to avoid any awkwardness. Soyun agrees, but before ending the conversation, Sohu says he really needs to ask her one more thing. Looking straight into her eyes, he asks if she honestly thought he was a disgusting pig before he lost weight and if she liked him that much back then. Without missing a beat, Seyun kicks him in the shin, telling him to stop with his nonsense. Awkwardly, she says he's asking ridiculous questions, and if he keeps it up, she'll finish him off. Whining, Sohu complains that her kick was even stronger than those from his army sergeant. Despite his persistence, Seyun says it's late, and she needs to leave since she has to wake up early the next day. She also mentions that her mother isn't feeling well, so she's helping her father open the restaurant. But Sohu, bold as ever, asks if his mother-in-law is really sick. Initially, Sayun responds no, saying her mom just has some aches. However, she freezes in shock when she realizes that Sohu called her mother-in-law. Quickly, she lunges at him, landing a flurry of punches and demanding to know what he really meant by that. The next day, the protagonist heads to his school. As soon as he arrives, he barely knocks on the door before the professor opens it, already expecting him. He remarks that he came because he heard she was waiting for him. The professor looks at him with a smile and says it's very nice to see him there. Quickly, she stands up and asks Sohu to grab a chair and sit beside her. As he settles in, the professor begins to laugh, saying that the more she thinks about it, the funnier everything gets. Curious, Sohu asks what she's talking about. Looking slightly embarrassed, she explains that she's referring to the day she didn't recognize him in class, and how every time she recalls it, she can't help but laugh. Noticing that Sohu still looks confused, the professor elaborates, saying she hasn't yet gotten used to the new Sohu. She leans closer and asks how he changed so much overnight, marveling at how incredible it is. The protagonist, feeling a bit shy, smiles and replies that he really has changed a lot. At that moment, the professor stops talking and just stares at him silently. Sohu's face turns red, and he asks why she's looking at him like that, making him feel self-conscious. She responds that despite his transformation, some of his cute traits from before remain, like his inability to hold eye contact for too long. Sohu, still flustered, says that he always feels embarrassed in the presence of a celebrity, especially someone he respects so much like her. Playfully, the professor remarks that while his appearance has changed significantly, he's still just as kind as ever around her, which makes things much easier than she imagined. Resting her feet near his, she tells him that she called him over to ask him something. She begins to lay out her plan, asking if he knows that she's still hosting her show, Cooking with Hera. Sohu responds enthusiastically, saying he knows because he watches every episode. This show, of course, was the same one where Minji temporarily replaced him, causing an uproar of comments that drove Sohu to join the armed forces. Without further delay, while pouring a cup of tea, the professor explains that she wants him to assist her like he used to. Curious, Sohu asks if she's really asking him to be her assistant again. She confirms, saying that's exactly what she wants. Surprised, Sohu admits there's a problem because he knows she already has someone else as her assistant. The professor responds that while this student, Kyumo, is helpful, he isn't as talented as Sohu. Hearing this, Sohu hesitates and then asks about Minji, visibly uneasy. She asks if he's referring to number 2, the person who replaced her briefly but then quit. She adds that it doesn't make sense for the son of the famous chef Tazun to appear on TV as another chef's assistant. She then hands Sohu a cup of tea, encouraging him to relax. After some reflection, the protagonist agrees, saying she can count on him. When the professor hears this, she's delighted and asks if he's serious, creating a moment of suspense. Sohu confirms he's serious but mentions that he has one condition. Boldly, he says he'll only accept if she lets him cook at her house. Caught off guard, the professor asks if that's really his condition. Hera responds, charmed, saying that Sohu is her favorite student, so of course she would cook for him. She adds that they've already eaten together at her house several times. With a smile, Sohu says he remembers those times. Memories of delicious dishes she prepared flash through his mind. He also recalls a particular day when she complained about the new director being overly demanding, which made their workload much heavier than before. Still chubby at the time, Sohu commented that the previous director used to resolve everything well before 3 o'clock. Professor Hara mentioned that she felt bad for making the boy work so much and go hungry during the day. She then added that it was too late to cook a full meal, so she apologized for only serving side dishes. The boy reassured her, saying it was no problem and that it was his fault she couldn't rest. Sweetly, Sohu said no one could refuse food prepared by the greatest chef and that it was an honor to eat there. Hara thanked Sohu, saying he was very kind and that it warmed her heart to know he thought that way. She then joked that she only let him into her house because he was Sohu. If it had been someone else, it would have been too dangerous. Laughing at the protagonist, she teased him, saying she didn't even see him as a real man. Playfully, she began poking his flab, commenting on how it jiggled in a way that was hard to believe. Both the professor and Mary had never truly considered him a manly man. It broke his heart. By now, he should have been so offended that he would stop following her, but he had already accepted that no girl saw him as a man. It didn't matter anymore. His self-esteem back then was almost non-existent. That's why the new Sohu decided to check if things had changed. He asked if she could cook for him at her restaurant instead of at her house. Hera replied that in the past, it wouldn't have been an issue, but now that he looked so different, she didn't feel as comfortable. The charmer was surprised, muttering that at least now it seemed he was being recognized as a man, and his suspicions were confirmed by the professor herself. Suddenly, she remarked that if she cooked for him, she would be alone with him at home at night, and that's why she was hesitating. Breaking the tension, Sohu asked if he had really changed so much that it made her uncomfortable, pointing out that, at the core, all he had done was lose weight. The professor responded that, yes, he had slimmed down, but there was something different about him, maybe because he had gone to the army and matured. The protagonist reflected that the professor was acting strangely, just like Yusu had. It was a simple conversation, but he realized she was genuinely attracted to him. Through Professor Hara, he also realized that he had developed a liking for women's feet. Hara noticed Sohu had a goofy expression and asked what he was thinking about. Embarrassed, he replied that he was thinking about her restaurant and the kind of food he would order. Surprised, she asked if he was really going to help her like in the old days. Sohu confirmed, saying she could cook for him at the restaurant because it would be worth it either way. He decided to accept because he finally understood the charm of the professor and knew she would end up cooking for him at her house eventually. Meanwhile, over at Baekgang University's business department, the professor was confidently teaching her students about management strategies. Yusu, however, couldn't concentrate because her thoughts were consumed by Sohu. The poor girl kept recalling how, after he returned from the army, he had become incredibly handsome. Putting her pen down, Yusu wondered what on earth Sohu was doing at that moment. She thought about how Sohu seemed to know almost everything about her and suspected it was Minji's fault. He was always feeding Sohu stories, trying to mess with his head. And that's exactly what was happening. Sohu heard it all and even thanked Minji for the information. Irritated, the girl muttered that guys love to gossip about their girlfriends to others. She felt like she was losing her mind, but it wasn't a conversation she could have with Minji. At that moment, her phone buzzed with a message from Sohu himself. Curious and surprised, she glanced at the screen. She hadn't been expecting this. Just as she was thinking about him, he sent her a message. The boy started saying odd things, like how he had discovered he really liked feet in socks. She suggested they could talk about it later over some drinks, but he insisted on discussing it now. She then asked whose feet he had seen that made him fall in love, and he replied that it was Professor Hara's. The girl found herself wondering why this professor was like this. She had already targeted Minji and now seemed to have her sights set on Sohu. The two continued their conversation in more depth, trying to make sense of everything. Eventually, Sohu suggested they talk more later that night. Meanwhile, in Professor Hara's office, she was having a serious discussion with producer Kim. Many posts in the community forums were talking about a crisis that had caused her show to plummet to 0% ratings. Kim was on the phone, saying he had a savior who could revive the program. He asked if Minji was coming back, claiming he was the only one capable of saving the show. Hara responded that it wasn't Minji but Sohu, her first assistant. The producer, smiling, asked if she meant the chubby student. She confirmed and explained that he had spoken with her and committed to being by her side for the upcoming episodes. The producer countered, expressing doubt that it was a good idea, pointing out that even Minji couldn't save her program. He also mentioned the abundance of negative comments about Sohu and questioned how that big guy could possibly be the savior. Hara assured him that she would bring Sohu to next week's recording, promising he'd understand everything then. The producer concluded by saying they had nothing to lose and trusted Hara's judgment. She never did anything without a reason. Finally, the day arrived when Hara was eager to see just what Sohu was capable of. Smiling to herself, she wondered if Sohu could truly surpass Minji, the son of Tazan. As the sun set and business management classes ended, Yusu was ready to meet the protagonist. Excited, she checked her messages and was delighted to see that Sohu had sent her the location for their meetup. But out of nowhere, her phone started ringing, startling her. It was Minji, asking if she was still at the university or if she had already left. He said the house would be empty that night since his parents had a recording session and they could spend time together. The girl found herself in a tricky situation. To make things worse, Minji said he would pick her up wherever she was, leaving Sohu in a panic. She quickly replied that she was sorry but wanted to be alone that day. Minji asked if it was because she wasn't feeling well, offering that she could rest at his place instead. The girl insisted she really couldn't go and would stay home to rest in the comfort of her own house. Hearing this shocked Minji, who was used to having all the girls eating out of the palm of his hand. He said goodbye, telling her that if he couldn't do anything for her, it was better for her to rest and take care of herself. As soon as she hung up, Yusu reflected on how the jerk Minji was really mad at her. The boy grumbled to himself, questioning if she thought he didn't know her. After all, she never said no to him, not even when she had the flu. And now she was coming up with this story about not feeling well, blah blah blah. There he was, staring into the void, reflecting on everything that was happening. But we know, thanks to the scriptwriter, that Yusu didn't want to go out with Minji because she had a date planned with our beloved protagonist. A few days later, the protagonist was back at the recording center for Professor Hara's show when Kim saw him and was stunned. He turned to the professor, asking if this was really the same guy who used to be her assistant, clearly excited. He approached the protagonist and asked what the heck he had done to get as ripped as Superman. Modest as always, the protagonist replied that his time on the military service was intense and helped him lose a few pounds. Even so, the professor told Kim that she had warned him that Sohu was practically a new person, completely different from who he used to be. Smiling, she recounted the day she didn't recognize Sohu and couldn't believe it was him even though he was standing right there. The two continued to fawn over the protagonist, saying he now looked like a soap opera star. Then, Kim confidently remarks that he bets Sohu will generate higher ratings now than Minji did in 2 years. Hara asks if he's serious, recalling how Minji's debut was sensational, but questions whether Sohu would create more impact. She adds that with the protagonist's new appearance, he's undeniably recognizable and could be their biggest success yet. The director suggests holding off on revealing Sohu's name, allowing the audience to be drawn to his looks rather than the previous assistant. The protagonist's debut on the show was an absolute hit, and the plan was simple: reveal his true identity once he became the talk of every news site. Even the professor was astonished, telling Sohu that people were talking about him more than about her, the host of the show. When it came time to reveal the identity of the handsome new assistant, Hara boldly declared that he was someone who had faced a lot of hate in the show's comments before. She then dropped the bombshell, saying that he was the same chubby guy from 2 years ago who had been humiliated by the community. Everything went exactly as the producer had planned, giving Sohu the chance to get back at all the people who had mocked him in the past. And that's exactly what he did. The protagonist introduced himself, recounting the things he endured before joining the military, all while sporting the biggest grin on his face. Later that evening, Minji was sitting in his car with his fake girlfriend, watching the live stream of Sohu's big reveal on the show. Yusu, visibly annoyed, complained that the smug expression on Sohu's face was seriously irritating her. Noticing how Minji was acting, she asked if he was remembering the piggy Sohu from the past. This comment created a tense atmosphere in the car, and Minji didn't respond. Furious, he snapped that she was overstepping her bounds. He added that he didn't know what to say to her, which was why he had no expression, and asked why she was reacting so strongly, leaving him deep in thought. Yusu claimed she didn't care about Sohu's existence, saying he annoyed her. Without replying, Minji reflected on how she kept speaking negatively about Sohu but still chose to spend time with someone whose existence supposedly bothered her. On that warm night, the protagonist and Professor Hara were having dinner at Minji's father's restaurant. Near the VIP lounge entrance, someone suddenly started knocking loudly, drawing everyone's attention. It was the illustrious chef Tae-sung himself, arriving to greet his guests. To his surprise, seated in the VIP lounge were none other than Professor Hara and the protagonist. Politely, Tae-sung asked if the food was good and if it pleased their palates. Everyone responded enthusiastically, saying it was extremely delicious. After all, it had been prepared by Chef Tae-sung himself. Seeing all the praise, Hara joked that they were making her jealous and asked if they wanted Tae-sung to replace her. Tae-sung laughed and said he had been nervous upon hearing that Chef Hara and Sohu would be visiting. The director, amid all this, was shocked to see even Tae-sung giving Sohu so much attention. The protagonist embraced Tae-sung, expressing how great it was to see him again after so many years. Tae-sung added that he was impressed to see how much weight Sohu had lost and commented that he looked even better in person. Sohu replied that Tae-sung hadn't changed at all and looked just like he always had. Tae-sung wasn't just Minji's father, he was also the owner of the school where Sohu had graduated. Like Chef Hara, he had a massive following on YouTube and had appeared on several television programs. In comparison, Tae-sung's channel had at least 4 times the subscribers of his son's. When Tae-sung poured wine for Chef Hara, she was surprised, noting that it caught her off guard. He explained that it was because every client in the VIP room deserved special attention. Even Sohu remarked that the entire evening felt more like a dream than reality, clearly amazed. Tae-sung then asked Sohu if his friendship with Minji was still as strong as before. Stammering and visibly embarrassed, the protagonist assured him that, of course, they were still great friends. Tae-sung then suggested that Sohu bring Seyun along next time, mentioning how long it had been since he had seen the little troublemaker. Caught off guard, Sohoo turned to Taezong and assured him he didn't need to say it twice, he would absolutely make it happen. With that, Minji's father bid everyone farewell, bowing respectfully and wishing them a pleasant stay. As the group chatted about Taezong's unexpected appearance, the protagonist remained silent, lost in thought. Later, when they were about to leave the restaurant, their Uber arrived. Hara asked Sohoo if he had been the one to call for the car. The producer approached Sohoo, teasing him that he had never seen anyone drink as much as Hara did that evening. He added that she usually couldn't handle so many drinks back to back and suspected that this was her way of celebrating the show's revival after it had nearly been cancelled. Together with his companion, the producer told the protagonist to ensure that Professor Hara got home safely. Smiling as he got into the car, Sohoo reassured him, saying there was nothing to worry about, he would take good care of her. Within seconds, the car sped off. Inside the car, silence filled the air, accompanied by a tension that caught the protagonist off guard. Hara broke the silence, calling his name and saying she needed to talk to him. She then asked if he would still have the appetite to eat more if she cooked for him at her house. Surprised, Sohoo replied that she was clearly very drunk and could cook for him another time, without any rush. But to his shock, Hara admitted she had only been pretending to be drunk. She confessed that despite their age difference, she found herself attracted to him when she looked at him. Locking eyes with the protagonist, she asked if he would be willing to spend a little more time with her and embark on a great adventure together. With a sly smile, she added that he couldn't reveal what it was to anyone because that would ruin the fun. At this point, the protagonist, curious and intrigued, said he was eager to learn more about this mysterious dish. Before long, they arrived at Professor Hara's house and began preparing the main course. As Sohoo wandered around her home, he noticed some old paintings and photographs that stirred a wave of nostalgia. He remembered the night before he left for the army, when Minji had called him. Just as he was about to fall asleep, Minji had started sending photos frantically. At the time, Sohoo had grumbled, thinking there was no reason to respond to that troublemaker and not even knowing what the photos were about. Much to his surprise, they included old pictures of the three of them as children. Even more astonishing, the photos also featured Professor Hara, who Sohoo had seen for the first time on the night before his enlistment. The protagonist had intended to go to bed early, but those strange pictures stirred something deep inside him. Giving up on sleep, he quickly called Minji. Still confused, Sohoo asked his friend what on earth those peculiar photos meant. But Minji, ever the tease, said that Sohoo probably never noticed them before because they had been hanging in Hara's room. This left Sohoo utterly stunned, realizing that Minji must have been taken into Hara's room at some point. The clueless Minji even cracked a joke at the protagonist, acting as if he was celebrating something. Deep down, Sohoo knew he could easily hurt Minji with a comment, but he kept quiet, offering an awkward smile. He briefly considered asking if Minji was acting this way because of Seyun, but ultimately felt sorry for the guy. Meanwhile, Minji couldn't care less about Sohoo's feelings and continued mocking him, flaunting the fact that he had been to Hara's house. To make matters worse, he added that a 220-pound 22-year-old man was head over heels for Hara, but she only had eyes for him. The clown had only sent those photos to Sohoo because he knew the protagonist would never have the guts to enter Hara's room and see them in person. Sohoo listened to those ridiculous remarks silently, choosing not to respond. In the end, Minji wished him a good time in the military and assured him he would take care of Seyun. Sohoo's only reply was that Minji's real accomplishment was creating an enemy in the kitchen. Who would have thought he'd be in such a position? The next morning, there was Sohoo cooking, but this time it was for Hara instead of the other way around. Shortly after, Hara stumbled into the kitchen, still half asleep, exclaiming how wonderful the food smelled. Surprised, Sohoo said he was glad she had woken up since he was making an incredible soup for her. After some light conversation, the protagonist started tidying up, leaving Hara to enjoy her day off. After all, our Korean bodybuilder had his own commitments, including an early class, and headed out from Hara's house. At school, when the girls saw the protagonist, they couldn't stop wondering if he was the same guy who had appeared on the cooking show and looked even hotter in person. Seeing all the attention, Sohoo felt shy since he wasn't used to it. As everyone stared at him, his best friend and secret crush also glanced at him from the corner of her eye. The moment she realized it was Sohoo, her heart raced and her eyes lit up. She felt so embarrassed that she wondered if he could gain back the weight so she wouldn't feel so self-conscious. Sighing, she began to muster the courage, telling herself to relax and that everything would be fine. But just as she shouted, Sohoo, someone else yelled it louder. In a matter of seconds, a magnificent motorcycle pulled up beside the protagonist. Sitting on it was a blonde, greeting him cheerfully. Even Sogu was caught off guard, immediately asking the mysterious girl who on earth she was. Removing her helmet, the girl introduced herself as Rayhan, a member of his group. Smiling brightly, Rayhan explained that she had noticed from a distance how overwhelmed he looked by the crowd and came to his rescue. Sogu didn't know what to do, and Rayhan urged him to hop on the motorcycle or risk falling over since, according to her, his legs were too short to stand his ground. After much persuasion, Sogu hopped on the motorcycle, leaving Seyun watching from afar, unsure of what to do as she saw her beloved riding off with a blonde. She can only stand there, heartbroken, witnessing the scene. Rayhan turned out to be far more famous than Sogu or his friend had ever imagined. While they were eating, Rayhan casually mentioned that she had participated in a photoshoot for a well-known company. This left Sogu completely stunned, and he quickly asked if she was really that famous. Humble as ever, she replied that she was just a little well-known. Some people recognized her, while others had no idea who she was. Rayhan added that, truthfully, she didn't even come close to Sogu or Minji in terms of fame. She mentioned her appearance in the episode Super Palette of Master of Senses when she was still in high school. Rayhan noted that even now, people still watched her clip regularly, despite the fact that it aired ages ago. This brought back memories for Sogu, recalling the time he watched it with Minji and Seyun. Beyond the aired episode, the editors had also dug into her social media, and her photos were undeniably eye-catching. When Sogu checked out her profile, he couldn't help but compliment her, saying she had a stunning figure and an amazing silhouette. Smiling, Rayhan playfully replied that she hadn't realized he was so bold, complimenting her so directly. After much conversation, she casually mentioned that she was quite open-minded. At that moment, Sogu finally realized that Rayhan was flirting with him. It was completely unexpected. What shocked Sogu the most was when Rayhan revealed that, despite being so open-minded, she had never had a boyfriend. The revelation made him spit out his drink, utterly at a loss for words. Smiling, he remarked that she had surprised him and suggested she give him a heads up next time. He teased that it was ironic for someone with her mindset to have never been in a relationship. Rayhan laughed and explained that Maximum magazine had asked her the same question, adding that if Sogu wanted to know the answer, he could find it in the April issue. Minji, who wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, had already read the magazine and remembered the page Rayhan mentioned. In summary, Rayhan stated that she was waiting for the right person. Minji wasn't thrilled by this and wondered if she thought she was so special. What caught his attention was Rayhan mentioning that there was a guy she had liked since high school and that he was incredibly handsome. Her description was so specific that the editor-in-chief had asked her if she was sure about including it, warning that if the guy read the magazine, he'd know it was about him. Rayhan confidently confirmed that she had no problem making it clear it was intentional so the guy would know. Of course, when Minji read this, he assumed the girl was talking about him and started bragging to himself. Throwing himself on the bed, he celebrated, convinced he was the hunk Rayhan had been smitten with, and vowed that when they met, he'd make her dream come true. Meanwhile, Sohu was flipping through the page with Rayhan and was startled. He asked if the person she described in the magazine was him. Boldly and with a sly smile, Rayhan confirmed it was indeed him and cheekily asked if he had any interest in her. Sohu was shocked and embarrassed by the question. That evening, they decided to go to a hotel to watch Netflix and eat popcorn, keeping it casual. However, what Sohu didn't expect was a frantic call from Yusu. Annoyed, she ranted about how much of an idiot he was for ignoring her calls. She complained that it was irritating that now that he wasn't a fat pig anymore, he no longer cared about her. On the other side, even Professor Hara was upset, thinking she may have pushed things too far and left Sohu avoiding her. Meanwhile, Sohu received a cryptic text message. He began to think Rayhan's magazine comments really might have been about him. The fool, Minji, smugly joked that he wasn't interested in any girl from Sohu's class, but Rayhan had been teasing him for ages. Elsewhere, Soyun lay awake at home, unable to sleep, obsessing over the image of her beloved riding off on the back of that flashy blonde's motorcycle, leaving without even a glance back. The next day, Sohu got a ride from Rayhan after they finally left the hotel. As he dismounted the motorcycle, he suggested she park and wait for him inside the college. But removing her helmet, Rayhan casually shot back that she wouldn't be attending class today, she needed to head home and rest. This left Sohu stunned. She added that the night had been intense and that she really needed this break. Awkward but polite, Sohu agreed, telling her she should go home and rest without worrying. Sohu said he felt bad for Rayhan but acknowledged that she had chosen to give him a ride. At that moment, what caught his attention was a group of people heading toward the college. He grumbled that it was only 8 o'clock in the morning, and if they were there so early, they were probably from the culinary class. Rayhan revved up her motorcycle, saying she needed to get out of there before anyone saw her. With a smile on her face, she told Sogu that she was perfectly fine with everything that had happened between them and that, honestly, he was an amazing person. Then came the sweet talk. She assured him that if he didn't want to be her boyfriend, it was no big deal because what she truly didn't want was to see him unhappy. She added that she was really glad they had spent time together and that, if she had the chance, she'd do it all over again. Sohu, feeling a little awkward, thanked her, saying he was honored by her kind words. After all the sentimental chatter, Rayhan put on her helmet and began to say goodbye, mentioning that she'd see him in the morning. As she drove off, Sohu watched her from afar, wondering if she was genuinely okay or if it was just a front. While riding away, Rayhan unexpectedly crossed paths with none other than Seyun. She spent a moment admiring how beautiful, well-dressed, and perfectly groomed Seyun always looked. Passing quickly by the prota's friend, Rayhan decided right then and there that she was determined to become Seyun's friend, no doubt about it. Seyun, meanwhile, also noticed Rayhan's presence and realized that she was wearing the same clothes as the day before. After all this drama, class finally began, and Professor Hara was at the front, explaining everything. During the lesson, Hara noticed that Seyun was struggling with her dish, something that had never happened before. With her expertise, Hara remarked that Seyun wasn't focusing enough, leaving the girl looking a bit down as she apologized, saying she was sorry. Concerned, the professor asked if Seyun was okay, pointing out that it was obvious something was bothering her. The sight of Sogu leaving on the motorcycle so suddenly, and the fact that both he and Rayhan were wearing the same clothes from the previous day, only deepened Seyun's confusion. However, even while reflecting on all of this, Seyun whispered back to the professor that everything was fine, despite it being anything but. The professor, suspicious, remarked that Seyun had never acted like this before, suggesting it might be because of a man. When asked if it was Sogu, Seyun blushed deeply and denied it. Losing patience, the professor said that if Seyun could stop thinking about the boy, even during class, it would be a great improvement. Panicked, Seyun tried to explain that the professor had misunderstood everything, but Hara simply turned and walked away. Meanwhile, the twist was that both Seyun and Hara were struggling to focus on their classes because of Sohu. Later, Seyun rushed to check on her beloved, having spent the entire afternoon thinking about him. Her heart sank when she saw Sogu surrounded by girls once again. What upset her even more was noticing that he was now wearing different clothes, a relief, she thought, since he was no longer in the same tracksuit as before. But as soon as she realized her own thoughts, she muttered to herself, questioning why she was even happy to see he had changed. Embarrassed, she hurried away, thinking she must be losing her mind. Little did she know, Sohu had stored away his clothes from the previous night and changed into a fresh outfit. In reality, after the night at the restaurant, he had planned to go home and rest but ended up drinking with Hara. The next evening, he went out with Rayhan. With so many outings, the poor guy was desperately in need of a break. After some time lying in bed, Sohu reflected that all of this was more exhausting than the army. It felt like he'd been on a whirlwind trip for days. To make matters worse, out of nowhere, he received a message from Mary inviting him to go out. He knew he should probably decline but couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he told Mary she could come over to his house this time. Luckily for Sogu, she agreed to a more laid-back hangout at his place. Even so, the poor guy was so drained he could barely stand. At that moment, a new worry struck him. How was Rayhan doing? He realized he hadn't checked in with her, assuming she might need some time alone. But before he could send a message, he fell asleep right there on a bench in the park, with his little dog resting beside him. Meanwhile, Rayhan was far from okay. She felt incredibly sad and thought Sogu was being cruel for not texting her. Feeling awful, she picked up her dog and decided she needed a drink. When she arrived at a cozy bar, the waiter asked if she was there with the same guy from the previous night. With a tone of disappointment, she replied no, that this time she was alone. Who else could possibly be at the bar? Yes, the insufferable Minji. Spotting Rayhan, his friends immediately start gossiping, claiming she's the girl from Maximum magazine who supposedly has her eyes on him. Minji, huffing dramatically, accuses Rayhan of stalking him and laments how complicated his life had become because of her, claiming she's the girl from Maximum magazine who supposedly has her eyes on him. Minji, huffing dramatically, accuses Rayhan of stalking him and laments how complicated his life had become because of her. One friend bursts out laughing, while another jokes that Rayhan must want to confess her feelings to Minji, as hinted in the magazine. With his typical smugness, Minji even compliments her effort in showing up. Meanwhile, Rayhan can't stop thinking about Sogu, frustrated that he hasn't sent her a single message after everything they'd been through together. Minji's equally clueless friends continue to watch Rayhan from a distance, concocting wild stories about her intentions. When they see her drinking, they conclude she's just building up the courage to approach Minji. Minji, ever the fool, smugly suggests that his presence alone is intimidating her, and that's why she hasn't made her move yet. Amidst her quiet drinks, Rayhan is approached by one of Minji's friends, who smugly addresses her as Super Palette and asks why she's drinking alone. Startled, Rayhan stands and bows politely to greet him. The guy invites her to join their table, and, flustered, she quickly agrees with a meek yes, sir, before moving over. At the table, with an overly confident grin, one of Minji's friends teases her, saying she doesn't need to bring her drinks, just her glass will do. Clearly thinking he's charming, he follows up with a cringy pickup line. Rayhan, overwhelmed, becomes so embarrassed she can't find the words to respond. Meanwhile, back at Hara's house, the professor glances at a bag containing some of Sogu's clothes. She'd lent him those clothes to keep him from catching a cold, and he'd accepted without hesitation. However, what she didn't expect was for the protagonist to notice that some of the clothes looked strikingly similar to Minji's. When she confronts him, bewildered, he nonchalantly mentions that Minji used to wear a sweatshirt just like one of hers back in school. Flustered, Hara admits that Sohu wore that exact sweatshirt the previous night. Smirking, Sohu teases that maybe he liked it because it reminded him of Minji. Hara, clearly flustered, tries to brush it off. The truth was, when Sohu found that sweatshirt, Hara had been fast asleep, too focused on not sinking to Minji's level to even notice. But it was undeniable that Minji would notice the next time he saw Sohu wearing it. Grinning to himself, Sohu realized that everything Minji swore would never happen had, in fact, happened. When Sohu returned the sweatshirt, Hara looked startled and asked if he'd worn it to school all day. He replied that he'd only stopped by his house briefly to grab matching shoes to complete the outfit. Casually, he then asked if she really wore size large, the same size as Minji. With a hint of mischief, he added that the sweatshirt still carried the scent of the cologne Minji had used to impress Seyun. Hara, exasperated, confirmed that she'd already told him she wore size large and assured him he could pick up his freshly laundered sweatshirt the next morning. Shocked, Professor Hara wonders if Sohu might have run into Minji at school while wearing that sweatshirt. This was exactly why she kept staring at the bag. It would be a disaster if Minji saw that sweatshirt. But with everything that had happened recently, she couldn't bring herself to ask. Determined, she decides to get rid of the sweatshirt as soon as possible. Meanwhile, at the bar, Minji gets up, announcing that he needs to step outside to make a phone call. As he rises, he warns his friends not to crack any dad jokes in his absence. Rayhan watches him closely, noticing that he actually seems pretty upset. Curious, she asks his friends if something had happened to him. They reply that Minji has been feeling down because something terrible happened to him, but then he breaks into a wide grin when he spots Rayhan nearby. Hearing this, Rayhan wonders what could possibly be bad enough to bring someone so low. Meanwhile, Minji, annoyed, fires off messages to his fake girlfriend, complaining that she ignored him all day. Frustrated, he curses under his breath, thinking back to the previous night when Yusu essentially broke things off with him. She had said that since they weren't really a couple, it wasn't technically a breakup, but she didn't want to keep up the charade anymore. When she brought up ending things, Minji lost his temper, accusing her of having an affair with Sovu. But in her typical way, she simply responded that he could think whatever he wanted, she didn't care. Staring into her eyes, Minji asked if she was sure about that and warned her not to regret it later. With a provocative tone, he added that he thought she wanted to be the manager of his father's restaurant. She retorted that it had nothing to do with him, reminding him that his father had always praised her when she interned there. Still irritated, Minji claimed that if it were up to him, he would make Yusu quit school and take over as manager of the restaurant immediately. Polite as ever, Yusu bowed to Taizuan, who assured her that she should feel honored by such a compliment. Taizuan then added that even if she ended things with Minji, she could still work for him, as finding talent as exceptional as hers wasn't easy. At that moment, smiling, Minji responds that he doesn't care and that Yusu can do whatever she wants. After all, she's a traitor. Provoking her further, he asks if she feels pain for losing him, supposedly to Sovu. This enrages Minji, who starts shouting at Yusu, asking her what on earth she just said. The tension in the room becomes palpable, with Minji visibly agitated. As Yusu begins to leave, he rushes to the door and yells after her again, demanding to know where she's going. This leaves Minji rattled, wondering where this sudden change in her attitude came from. He continues to question why Yusu pretends that Sogu has nothing to do with the situation. With a pounding headache, he mutters that he never thought he'd lose a woman to a fat pig like Sovu. Completely irritated, he also wonders why Yusu has become so distant and why Professor Hara seems to be treating him similarly. Earlier, while walking to college, Minji had stumbled upon something shocking, Sohu wearing his old sweatshirt. At that moment, he couldn't help but question why that pig was wearing his clothes. Frustrated, he complains to himself that the sweatshirt should be with Professor Hara, not Sohu. With a pitiful smirk, Minji finally pieces the situation together and mocks the protagonist. He sneers, saying that Sohu had lost weight and it annoyed him to see him fitting into his clothes, believing Sohu had always been envious of them. But witnessing all this nonsense, Sohu doesn't even bother to respond, he simply stares at Minji with disdain. Minji continues, claiming he knows Sohu wore the sweatshirt on purpose and accusing him of seeking validation. He then turns to Sohu, calling him a beta and questioning whether he enjoys living off Minji's leftovers. The protagonist maintains his silence, but finally, he musters the courage to approach Minji. Walking closer, Sohu calmly says that, in the end, none of it matters because the only thing that counts is that none of the girls will ever look for Minji again because of him. Hearing this feels like a punch to the gut for Minji, who silently curses the protagonist. Then, Sohu begins to remove the sweatshirt, stating that this will be his last courtesy, out of respect for old times. Mocking Minji, Sohu adds that he plans to return it to Professor Hara, leaving Minji fuming and plotting how to get back at the protagonist. Meanwhile, as Minji's friends chat with the girl, they receive a call from him. Surprised, they quickly answer, wondering why Minji is calling instead of coming to them directly. The girl observes the scene, puzzled, unable to understand his behavior. On the other end of the line, Minji tells his friends they'll have to drink without him because he needs to have a chat with the super pallida. With a devilish grin, he asks that he's right outside and suggests they send her over to him. The overly confident Minji only wants to toy with her feelings, fully aware that she's Sohu's group partner, thinking this might somehow affect him. The jerk's ultimate plan is to use her as an object and discard her afterward. Worse, he intends to torment her so much that she feels awful and wants to leave school altogether. Meanwhile, Sohu is having a cozy movie night at home with his professor. Out of nowhere, Rayham slaps Minji across the face, leaving him utterly stunned. The bewildered Minji just stares at her, dumbfounded. Frustrated, he demands to know if she's lost her mind for slapping him like that out of the blue. But the blonde calmly retorts that he's the crazy one for suggesting a night about thrones without any warning. Annoyed, Minji begins yelling at her, insisting that she said in the magazine that she was always into him, which is why he made the suggestion. At that moment, Rayham delivers another sharp slap to his face, declaring that she wasn't talking about him. Furious and with tears welling up in her eyes, Rayham reveals that the person she referred to in the magazine was actually Sohu. Hearing this feels like a punch to the gut for Minji, who can only ask, in disbelief, what she just said. The next day, everyone is in the culinary class, waiting for the professor to arrive. Soyun is there, listening intently but with a sad expression on her face. Minji, on the other hand, is so shaken that he can barely focus. Even Mary is present, standing beside the professor, who is explaining things to the class. As she looks around, she spots none other than Minji sitting in the back. At that moment, Mary glares at Minji with irritation, calling him useless for not paying attention in class. She starts to panic, fearing that the chef will notice how detached Minji is. This could go downhill fast. Despite this, one of Minji's friends nudges him, urging him to snap out of it because Mary was watching. Minji groans, complaining that he wasn't even sleeping, so how could he wake up? When he looks forward, Mary is fuming at him, saying that if he falls asleep again, she'll deal with him herself. Minji apologizes, reflecting that he messed up, but he thinks Mary didn't need to treat him so harshly. Soyun, witnessing the whole scene, starts cursing Minji in her mind, calling him a failure who can't even pay attention in class. Minji's classmate also notices something is off, observing that Minji, who used to always glance at Soyun, hasn't even looked in her direction once today. Realizing this isn't like the Minji he knows, the friend wonders what happened to him last night. With Rayham, the super pallida, Minji vents his frustration, saying everything is garbage, especially after she claimed she never liked Sohu back in high school. He insists he doesn't believe her, arguing that if she liked him now, it would make more sense. But back then, Sohu is just a little chubby, so her story seems unbelievable. However, Rayham shocks Minji even further by revealing that it was all because of Soyun. Rayham explains that, like the other girls, she initially started as a die-hard fan of Minji. Over time, however, she noticed there was another girl just as admired as Minji, Soyun. Literally every girl in their high school chased after Minji, calling him gorgeous and dreamy. But despite being the prettiest girl in school, Soyun seemed to only have eyes for Sohu instead of caring about Minji. Raham remarks that it was such a bizarre combination that no one could imagine Seyun and Sobu dating. Everyone always thought the two were just friends and nothing more. But Raham began to rethink that when she realized Seyun must have had a very specific reason to like Minji. Then, she finally met the culinary genius, Sogu, whose talent was so brilliant it was almost terrifying. Looking Minji straight in the eyes, Raham concludes that they were the only ones who had ever truly liked Sogu, even back when he was still chubby. She firmly ends the conversation by stating that Minji definitely wasn't the guy from the magazine she had mentioned earlier. Deep down, Raham decided to keep this a secret because she knew Minji had a reputation to uphold and didn't want to expose him. The revelation left Minji traumatized, questioning whether Seyun could truly like Sogu as a man or if they were just friends. He desperately hoped that Soyun merely pitied Sogu, knowing his mother had abandoned him as a child. Furious, he slams the table, muttering that it's infuriating because he knows Sogu was pathetic, but Seyun didn't need to stick by his side for so long. After feeling like a fool, the boy begins to wonder if he would ever have another chance with Seyun after everything they had been through together. Later, the protagonist was in his culinary class, but upon seeing some news about Minji's show, he went silent, visibly worried. He also reflected on the fact that Raham had been absent from class for 2 consecutive days. Concerned about her, he quickly sent a message asking if her absence was his fault. The poor guy felt guilty about everything he had done to a girl who had always been so kind to him. He knew she only wanted him to feel less pressured, but he was certain he was to blame for her staying away from school. At a park, the distressed girl starts questioning whether she should have turned down the interview with Maximum magazine, thinking that it might have prevented many of her current problems. Meanwhile, during his workout, the protagonist receives a call from Kengi. Without hesitation, he pauses to take the call and find out what she wanted. The girl teases him, saying he finally answered, acting as though she now needed an appointment to talk to Sohu. Embarrassed, the boy apologizes, explaining that his life had been hectic lately. Yusu reassures him to take it easy but asks if he is free that evening to cook dinner together. However, what shocks the protagonist the most is hearing her say that she had broken up with Minji. She adds that maybe now she could pursue a serious relationship since she wouldn't be seeing Minji anymore. As soon as night falls, the protagonist rushes to her house to attend the dinner he was just invited to. For the record, during one of his conversations with Mary, she mentioned that Seyun had been the most beautiful girl in school since they were young and had always liked him, which was obvious from the way she acted. That was why other girls couldn't hurt Sogu's ego. Mary also commented that, for most men, talking to Seyun was a challenge, but for Sogu, it was always comfortable being around her. Finally, Mary concludes that Seyun had always prepared Sogu for adulthood, even if he didn't realize it at the time. She quickly moves on from the topic, saying she didn't want to dwell on it too much. Hearing this, the protagonist was utterly shocked, realizing that it all made sense. His heart started racing as if he had hit his head. The truth was, Sogu missed Seyun too, but he tried to hide it to maintain his tough exterior. Before leaving the protagonist's house, Mary said this would be the last time they would go out with intentions beyond friendship. Concerned, Sohu asked what she meant by that, if she was being serious. It felt like a breakup chain reaction. First, Yusu broke up with Minji. Second, the protagonist broke up with Yusu, telling her they couldn't keep seeing each other like that. Realizing things were heating up for him, the protagonist wondered if he'd now end up without any girl. He thought he needed to ask Mary why all this was happening. Had the tutorial ended? With a smile, Mary said that everything has to come to an end and that Sogu needed to live his life. After all, he had always been complete from the start because of Seyun. Then she mentioned she was now looking for someone different from Sogu, someone with more experience. Curious and a bit jealous, the protagonist asked if she had really met someone like that. With a little smirk, she didn't say anything specific but replied, "You, Prota, actually have a whole world ahead of you and should start thinking the same way." Outside the protagonist's apartment, Mary glanced back at his building, regretting that they wouldn't hang out like that anymore. But she knew she had to act properly and stick to her ethics. A few days earlier, while Mary was out on a little outing with Seyun, she noticed her friend's hands were hurting. She teased, saying that this didn't used to happen but now seemed almost intentional. Mary asked what was going on but, sensing the mood wasn't great, shifted the topic to Seyun's preparations. Soyun replied that everything was fine. Then Mary mentioned that the professors were worried about Seyun, saying she seemed unable to focus in class, as if her head were in the clouds. Smiling, Mary asked for honesty, wondering if it was all because of a guy. After all, it was obvious Seyun wasn't herself. Mary added that she could keep a secret but didn't understand how an ordinary guy could be so attractive that even Seyun was acting like this. but Seyun stayed silent. Noticing this, Mary asked if Seyun wasn't going to say anything. Feeling a bit irritated, Seyun told Mary to drink what was in her glass since she was only letting it sit there as decoration. Still smiling, Mary says she drank a lot the night before, but since Seyun insisted, she would drink again for the sake of their friendship. Then, Seyun reveals that Sohu was the first man she ever had feelings for. What a plot twist, right? With disappointment in her voice, Seyun admits that it was serious and, for a time, the feeling was mutual. Mary laughs and says Seyun must have really loved Sohu when he was chubby. That's true love. Poor Sohu, feeling miserable. Seyun finally confesses that she can't get Sohu out of her head and wonders why this is happening to her. She adds that every time she hurt her hands in the kitchen, it was because she was thinking about him. Mary remembers her promise to crush Minji's ego in this year's competition. But at this pace, it wouldn't happen. Seyun assures Mary that her team would easily handle Minji's team. Mary remarks that even if Seyun had to go out with Sohu like before to win the competition, it should still happen. After all, no matter how much they tried to avoid it, they'd always been close friends since they were kids. Mary asks why Seyun is so withdrawn and if she's afraid something might happen between her and Sohu. In her thoughts, Seyun reflects that it would be impossible to resist Sohu now. After all, if she liked him when he was chubby, now it's a whole new level. Right? But Seyun says she isn't afraid of something happening between them, she's afraid of falling even more in love with him, only for him to run away again like before. Even when Mary points out that there's no navy for Sohu to escape to now, Seyun remains sad, looking down. Mary, noticing this, feels sorry for Seyun because she genuinely likes Sohu. It's unfortunate, Mary thinks, because she knows she can't go out with Sohu anymore because of this. While Seyun grumbles that it sucks that Sohu lost weight and wishes he'd get chubby again, Mary, being a good friend, decides to step away from Sohu and stick to her ethics. Meanwhile, at Minji's father's restaurant, he was talking to an employee in front of some guests when suddenly the employee leaned in to whisper that Miss Shoei had broken a special plate he had purchased. At that moment, in front of the crowd, Minji's father casually commented that a broken plate wasn't the end of the world, but he needed to know how Miss Shoei was doing. Hearing this, the group around him got excited, celebrating that Chef Tazung truly cared about his employees. Sure, right. But as soon as they turned their backs, the chef confronted the employee, saying he wanted to have a serious talk with that terrible employee, Miss Shoei, later that evening. He instructed the worker to make sure everyone left on time because he needed to have a straight-up conversation with Miss Shoei after hours. When he arrives, he finds the girl apologizing, saying it wasn't on purpose and that she accidentally broke the plate. But what does the guy do? He calls her stupid, asking why she keeps making these mistakes, knowing she'll have to apologize afterward, and claiming she's completely useless. He yells that he's warned her before, if she messes up again, he'll fire her for being so terrible. The poor girl starts crying, desperate, saying it wasn't intentional and that she's really sorry. But Minji's father, with bitterness in his heart, says she's useless and should be kneeling there, begging for forgiveness. Then he reveals that two things irritate him greatly. First, a girl breaking plates in his kitchen. Second, his son losing a woman or anything else to another guy, which, in this case, was the protagonist himself. Let's rewind a couple of years to better understand this. It's been about 2 years since the protagonist's mother disappeared. One day, they were at Minji's father's house, having dinner like there was no tomorrow. Tazung asks the kids if the food is good and tells them they can take as much time as they want. He doesn't want anyone leaving with a stomachache. But what catches the chef's attention is the protagonist, with his curious little face, noticing that the aroma was shrimp-like, but in reality, it was shrimp powder instead of chopped shrimp. Surprised, Tazung asks how he figured that out. After all, neither Minji nor Seyun understood what was in the dish, they just kept eating with that look of starving kids. Next, Tazung, even more curious, asks the protagonist what type of meat it was. The boy responds that it wasn't chicken breast, like the kind usually added to soy sauce stews. This leaves Tazung super impressed, and he tells the little protagonist that he's spot on and absolutely amazing. Tazung pats the young boy on the head, saying he's a genius and definitely has a future in cooking. At first, Tazung frequently invited the protagonist over to his house and felt sorry for him since his mother had left him to fend for himself. That's how Tazung discovered Sohu's culinary talent. Fascinated and proud, Tazung regularly brought Sohu into his home and taught him how to cook. He intended to teach Minji a bit later, but he ended up starting earlier than planned because of Sohu. Another thing that caught Tazung's attention was that Seyun was also learning to cook. He thought she was doing exceptionally well in the kitchen, probably because her parents owned a famous cafe. Smiling, he commented that it was interesting how they were always together, as if it were fate. After teaching them, Taezong said he would taste their dishes to decide the winner. In the end, it was always a tie because he couldn't decide which dish was better. From a young age, Minji was insufferable and hated the situation. With a disappointed expression, Taezong often said they tied for first place, but as soon as the protagonist and Seyun left, Minji always heard the real verdict from his father. Sadly, Taezong would gather the courage to tell Minji that Sogu had won yet again and that Minji had lost to that kid without a mother. Poor Minji always faced his father's hidden wrath, a pressure no one else saw. Taezong would remind him that he was the son of the great Taezong and yet kept losing to a nobody like Sogu. Threatening his son, Taezong warned that he would be furious if Minji lost again and that next time, he had to defeat Sogu in the kitchen. The man was so cruel that he'd tell Minji his dinner would be the dish Sogu cooked, as punishment for losing. The little boy, scared of the situation, would just nod and agree, saying his father was right. Fast forward to the present, the next day at college, the protagonist was sitting next to his blonde friend, Mayhem, realizing they had a massive assignment to complete. Mayhem leaned in and whispered, asking if he didn't have to head to the broadcast station to record the cooking show with Professor Hera. He responded that he was fine, not wanting to overburden himself since they had recorded 3 weeks worth of content last week. The class representative then began talking about a planned school trip, saying it would happen as soon as midterms were over and that attendance was mandatory for all freshmen. Without a valid reason to miss it, everyone had to go, no exceptions. At that moment, Mayhem asked if he thought Seyun would join the trip. Surprised, the protagonist replied that he had no idea and hadn't discussed it with Seyun. He explained that juniors weren't required to attend, so Seyun probably wouldn't be there, then asked why Mayhem wanted to know. The girl revealed that she always wanted to get closer to Seyun, so she was asking for a chance to see her too. The protagonist complained that Seyun hadn't been responding to his messages lately and seemed entirely focused on the school representative selection, which made her ignore him. He added that whenever he texted her, it took at least 6 hours for her to respond, and sometimes she even left him on read. Because of this, he was avoiding contacting her too. One morning, on his way to school, Sogu sent a message to Seyun, but she only replied 6 hours later. And honestly, her replies were always so dry, you know? Just saying she understood or wishing him good luck, nothing more. Realizing it took Seyun 6 hours to respond, Sogu was sure she was avoiding him. He wondered why she was doing this, especially since she used to reply so quickly before. But, to his surprise, that night he discovered something shocking. While in his room on his computer, the doorbell started ringing frantically. Irritated, Sohu asked who it was, but the person on the other side just yelled at him to stop asking stupid questions and open the door. When he opened it, it was Seyun, who was so drunk she could barely stand. Sohu asked what was going on, reminding her that she'd said she couldn't drink because of the midterms next week. But out of nowhere, she pointed her finger at him, accusingly asking if he realized she'd hurt herself again that morning. Still pointing, she declared it was his fault because every time she received a message from him, she lost her focus and ended up injuring herself in the kitchen. The poor guy was completely lost, not understanding why he was suddenly being blamed. Then, she said that before, he used to eat powdered milk, and instead of stopping him, now she was about to buy it for him. Almost pleading, she begged Sogu to start gaining weight again. With sadness in her voice, she said that if he didn't, she wouldn't know how to live anymore because she couldn't get him out of her mind. Once again, Sogu had no idea what to say or do. The tension between them was palpable, and both were sad, unsure of how to proceed. Almost crying, Seyun begged again for Sogu to go back to how he was before. But Sogu stayed silent, leaving her even sadder. She began crying, admitting that she had already told him she couldn't even concentrate in class because of him. She pleaded for him to eat the powdered milk and gain weight again. Seeing Seyun imploring for him to return to being the chubby guy she remembered, he recalled what she had said before. But then, to her surprise, Sogu asked if she really thought she could get him out of her mind if he gained weight again. Still a bit groggy, she asked what he meant. With a grateful look, Sogu told her he was incredibly thankful that she had always been there for him and that no matter how he looked, he would always love her. And then, my friends, a moment happens, they kiss. The protagonist reflects that he always knew Seyun put in so much effort to look beautiful every day, but what made her truly captivating was her dedication to cooking. After all these revelations, he realized Seyun had been trying to hide how deeply betrayed and hurt she felt by him. When he saw her crying, it felt like his heart was shattering. Finally, he promised Seyun he would never abandon her again, as he did when he left for the Navy. Deep down, he knew that while he was there, he often called out Seyun's name in his sleep. Later, while the protagonist was relaxing in the bath, his phone started ringing like crazy, and guess who it was? None other than Yusu, of course. But, to her despair, the protagonist didn't even notice his phone buzzing. Meanwhile, at school, two girls were doing their makeup in the bathroom, excited about the upcoming field trip, when suddenly a loud bang startled them, making their hearts race. The shock was so intense they even smudged their makeup. Frightened, they looked at each other, wondering what had happened. The culprit behind all the commotion? Yusu, completely beside herself because she couldn't handle being ignored by the protagonist. She even considered throwing her phone against the wall and bursting into tears again. But then she remembered that if the protagonist decided to call her back, she'd need her phone. With her emotions running high, she desperately begged the universe for him to answer her calls because she missed him so much.